for why they should bring into your drafts for 2021. If you agree with me, hit me up in the comments. Let me know what you think. If you disagree with me, well, eat shit. No, I'm kidding. If you disagree with me, I love going back and forth. That's what the fantasy community is all about. Hit me with a comment. I read all of them. I try to respond to all of them. And if you like these videos, hit that thumbs up. Helps us a ton. Again, YouTube algorithm. And subscribe to the channel as well if you haven't done so yet. Let's dive into it. But before we do, you got to check out Underdog Fantasy if you haven't done so yet. You've already heard me say it a million times if you've watched my videos in the past. I love Underdog Fantasy. It is by far my favorite platform for best ball drafts. They've got the $3.5 million best ball tournament going on right now, over $1 million to first. It's the biggest tournament in best ball history. It's fantastic. The platform's awesome. You can draft on the app, desktop, laptop, whatever you want. And if you use the promo code Awesemo, AWESEMO, you'll get $25 when you sign up and deposit. Use it on whatever you want. Man, it's been so popular lately that the $50K to first, $5 to enter puppy already filled up like a week ago, and we're not even in August yet. So I'm assuming we're going to see more of those type of tournaments as we draw closer to the season. If you want to draft now or you want to wait closer till we kick off for week one, whatever you want to do doesn't matter. But when you do it, when you sign up, use that promo code Awesemo, AWESEMO. Get your $25 injected into your account when you sign up and deposit using the promo code Awesemo. I'll see you over there. UnderdogFantasy.com. Julio Jones isn't worth more than a fourth-round pick? Seriously? I'd actually love to have this very debate on why Jones should have an ADP of 38, and I'm totally willing to listen. So if this is where you stand, leave a comment down below telling me why he shouldn't go in the first 3 rounds. But the injury-prone argument isn't going to get you very far, because while Jones dealt with a nagging hamstring injury all of last year and was on the field for only 9 games, he's played at least 14 games in each of his last 6 seasons. And in those seasons, he was the wide receiver 3, 2, 7, 6, 6, and 6. This year, Jones is being drafted as the wide receiver 17. So sure, the Titans have a 2,000-yard rusher in Derrick Henry and another elite receiver in A.J. Brown. But the Falcons had another alpha receiver in Calvin Ridley last year, and Jones was the wide receiver 3 in the 7 games that he played to completion. Yeah, you heard that right. In the 7 games Jones played from start to finish, he was the wide receiver 3, averaging 100 yards per game with a 76.3% catch rate, 11.9 yards per target, and 15.6 yards per reception. I totally understand. He's 32 years old now. He's getting up there in age. But Jones showed absolutely zero signs of age deterioration last year. Actually, he was incredible when on the field. Arthur Smith might be gone, with Todd Downing being installed as the new offensive coordinator in Tennessee. But it's hard to believe this Titans offense can't easily support 2 elite wide receiver seasons. They churned out 2 top 30 receivers last year, with one of them being Corey Davis, and the since departed Jonnu Smith caught 8 touchdowns on the year. Plus, there's no way Henry handles another 378 carries. The best part about all this is we don't need another top 5 season from Jones at his ADP. He just needs to be better than some of the 16 receivers going ahead of him. It's actually quite shocking that there are so many people out there who are unwilling to draft Ezekiel Elliott when they're sitting at the 5 spot in draft.
It is the Awesemo MLB Deeper Dive. Greg here, joined by Adam, a show that in theory we've already done because we did the game by game breakdown, the strategy show this morning, but the ownership is so wildly different that it's kind of like we're talking about a different slate now, Adam.
Yeah, it feels a little bit different. Obviously, we'll have different talking points since a lot has changed. We have, lineups now too, obviously, so a little bit more information.
Yeah, some of that has changed. The owners, obviously, the pitchers are still the same. The players are generally the same. Jordan's a little more tired now than he was earlier, but other than that, we've got things mostly being the same. We had a pretty big basketball trade that went down. Now, this is related to the baseball show, but I was trying to wrap my head around that because I thought that was a pretty wonky trade. The other thing also is we had Aaron Rodgers, who reportedly retired and now is not going to retire, because this is something that's been bothering me a little bit as of late. There's no incentive to be accurate when you're doing sports reporting anymore. Nobody, if you just reported that Aaron Rodgers like 2 weeks ago had just worked everything out with the Packers, nobody gives a shit. Nobody responds to that on Twitter. But if you just go out and you're like, yeah, Aaron Rodgers is going to get traded to the Broncos, Aaron Rodgers is going to retire, it generates a whole bunch of clicks to your content, and that's way more valuable. We've seen the same thing with Damian Lillard, where Damian Lillard has said himself like 20 times he doesn't want to be traded. Damian Lillard said in an interview last week he doesn't want to be traded. Still, the reports about Damian Lillard is like Damian Lillard's forcing a trade because that's what generates clicks. That's what gets people all fired up. But whatever, that's been on my mind. It's definitely annoying for sports betting purposes, just because I feel it's really hard to get accurate information. So the only thing I'll say is, don't try to respond to every single fake trade thing that's out there, because ultimately I kind of think it's going to play a little bit of an issue on our industry going forward, just because we're seeing people like Ari Abraham 2 years ago significantly move the sports betting market by saying that Kawhi Leonard was going to go to the Lakers, and now Ari Abraham's deleted his Twitter account. So that aside, let's talk about some baseball. First, starting with this, we've had a lot of changes in ownership, Adam. What are the biggest changes from now compared to when we did the strategy show this morning?
I mean, I think the biggest thing is Shohei Ohtani on DraftKings going from 75% owned to about 48, 49%. That was something I said I thought there was a good chance would happen. And it did, but it makes it so Ohtani is more appealing. The Rockies are less appealing. As far as, offenses go, it looks like it's more or less the same around the top. A little bit more ownership going to teams like Toronto, but nothing crazy there. I think Ohtani was the big change.
Yeah, and it was something that you had called was going to happen. Not that it was something like I didn't know how much it was going to drop. You were almost spot on with what the ownership was going to be. 75% did seem high, but you'd said somewhere around 50. We haven't projected for 48 right now on DraftKings, but obviously Ohtani's a vastly different play. 48% projected ownership for 75. That's a number that's easier to be in line with the field with or overweight to. And then also the Rockies, who we thought, could have been a viable leverage stack early in the day. That kind of goes out the window when Ohtani is no longer projected for 75% ownership. But with that aside, let's get into the slate. So we do have, starting off, the Washington Nationals playing in Philly against the Phillies. So let's start with Joe Ross, a pitcher who both of us had some interest in this morning. Nothing's changed for me. He's priced, obviously, that stayed the same, but he hasn't become more popular. He's still only projected for 1% ownership today on DraftKings. On FanDuel, Joe Ross also project for 1% ownership. I think that relative to his current ownership percentage, Joe Ross is the guy who I really want to be overweight to the field to in tournaments.
Yeah, I agree with you. Same thing we had talked about this morning. It's not that it's a great spot for Ross. It's not that he's a great pitcher, but he's also not a terrible pitcher. He comes in with a 24.7% strikeout percentage. To put that in context, it's higher than Mike Minor. It's the same as Herman Marquez, and he's just not getting any ownership here. Only a 2.7% ownership percentage on us now, shy of 2% ownership projection for Ross at 7,900. So I think on a slate where pitching is pretty wide open, it makes some sense to take shots on Joe Ross at that ownership.
Yeah, and with Joe Ross, to me also, you just look at some of the other pitchers who are on the slate and, some other moving parts, for instance. So Herman Marquez was somewhat popular earlier in the day, but now Herman Marquez has become significantly more. Am I looking? Oh no, that's on FanDuel. But on DraftKings now, Herman Marquez, he's still fairly lower owned on FanDuel, which is sensible. But on DraftKings, Marquez has now gotten all the way up to 34% projected ownership. So he's the second most popular pitcher on the slate. Just looking for guys to pivot off him, Joe Ross is one of the ones that immediately stands out to me at 1% ownership. I mean, we're getting a 30th of the ownership basically on Joe Ross compared to Herman Marquez. Sure, more often than not, Marquez is going to outscore Joe Ross, just not at a 30-1 clip. So Joe Ross is somebody that I want to be overweight to on the field in tournaments. But in terms of stacking against Joe Ross, what do you make of the Phillies?
Kind of a mediocre spot middle of the pack in terms of top stack percentage at about 6%, only getting about 4% ownership though. So I think it's an okay stack because they're projected to be a little bit under-owned, but unlikely that they kind of move to the front of the list for me just because they're not one of the more likely stacks to succeed, and Ross is getting no ownership. So they don't have a ton going for them other than they're just getting a little bit less ownership than they deserve.
Yeah, it's spot. Listen, I like Joe Ross more than his ownership is. I think there's a lot of not so great starting pitchers on this slate, and there's guys that I prefer to pick on than Joe Ross. But on the other side of the mound, we have Spencer Howard is going to be on the hill for the Phillies. I kind of like Spencer Howard as a pitcher. Just the real issue here is going to be how deep he's going to work into the game. What is his workload going to look like? He's been pitching a lot out of the bullpen this year, and even some of his recent starts that we've seen, he hasn't gone all that deep into the game. I know that you had earlier in the day looked at some of his minor league numbers, and we saw that maybe he was working a little bit deeper than he did in some of his recent major league outings. But how deep are you expecting Spencer Howard to be able to work today?
Yeah, I mean, I'm expecting like 3 to 5 innings, just not enough that I'm likely to get to him on this particular slate. I actually just did a crunch with our most recent ownership projections and all of that. I didn't get to any Spencer Howard. I did get to about 18% Joe Ross on DraftKings. So that's a spot where I think, just based on what you and I were saying, I expected to be, and, seems like I'll be pretty far overweight on Joe Ross here.
Yeah, and then one other thing, talking about stacking against Spencer Howard, the Phillies bullpen has been a little bit of a train wreck so far this year, and there's certainly times we've seen them blow up over the last few years. So Spencer Howard, I think he could be effective for the first few innings, but how do you feel about the Nationals as a stack who are likely going to be going up against a lot of that Phillies bullpen?
Yeah, I mean, I think the upside for the Nats is still very high. I mean, we've seen plenty of monster games from them recently. The ownership on Washington is coming in a little bit lower than it probably should. They're like the first team. There's 5 teams at the top that are all pretty close, between like 10 and 14% chances of being the top stack. Washington's the next tier down. So, again, what's hurting them is they're not one of the top 5 offenses. They're not facing a popular pitcher, but they are projected to be a little bit under-owned. Just kind of looking through my hitter exposures on DraftKings right now. Nothing from Washington like really jumping out, but getting guys in that like 10 to 15% range, like Soto and Turner.
Yeah, I do find it kind of surprising that Juan Soto is only projected for 7% ownership. And it's not to say that the Nationals are massively chalky or anything like that. They are, somewhere in the middle of the road in terms of ownership. But often the ownership on Washington is entirely driven by Trey Turner and Juan Soto. So the pricing is maybe a little bit restrictive here, particularly on DK, where they're both priced over 6,000. But I look at Trey Turner, 6,100. Maybe I want to be underweight to the field on him with ownership in the teens. But Juan Soto, I like getting overweight to him at 7% ownership. And then if you play anybody else in the lineup who isn't Juan Soto, Trey Turner, Josh Bell, you're getting a pretty contrarian play, because it is the rest of the guys in the lineup we're looking at, 3 to 5% ownership elsewhere. So are any of those other cheaper players in the lineup, say like Alcides Escobar is leading off, are any of them appealing value options to you?
Barrera is actually showing up quite a bit for me just because he's a cheap catcher option. Nothing, special about him. Steamer has him with a 136 ISO. He's not a good hitter at all. It's just that he's 2,400 and not getting much ownership. So I am getting to some of him.
Yeah, that's how I feel about catcher a lot as well. Basically, anybody who's min price or close to min price is going to end up in a lot of my lineups. So Tres Barrera is actually one of my most rostered catchers right now. My initial build I have him in 17% of my lineups right now, and it's solely because of the price point. He's so cheap that he just fits into a lot of lineups. Next game on the slate here is the Toronto Blue Jays playing in Boston to take on the Red Sox. So earlier in the day, both of us were pretty high on Toronto, and we thought they were one of the best stacks to get to on the slate. Has that changed for you at all?
No, they look like my second highest owned stack right now. Getting to a lot of these guys, just in kind of clicking through. 18% on Guerrero, 20% on Semien, like 10% on Biggio, 20% on Bichette. So definitely looks like I'm getting to a lot of Toronto. And I think that makes sense. When you look at the top stack pool, they have the second highest top stack percentage, but they are getting less ownership than Boston, who's first, by a pretty wide margin. So they project to, offer some leverage on the field. And I think I'll get to them a lot, just like we talked about this morning.
Yeah, and the other thing, too, about the end of this lineup, and to rehash a point I mentioned from this morning, the top of the lineup is now fairly popular and also really expensive. We're talking about Vlad Jr., George Springer, Bo Bichette, Marcus Semien. All these guys have price tags and ownership. But once you get deeper down in the order, we have hitters that I think are quality guys that we could also save some salary with. So guys like Lourdes Gurriel, Randall Grichuk, Kevin Biggio, all of these guys I think are viable options that are going under-owned in tournaments. We're looking at guys in Gurriel and Grichuk, 2 and 3% owned, 6% ownership going to BGO. Given their price points, I really like mixing and matching them with the more expensive options. And I'm going to assume you're going to agree with me because this is this conversation we already had today.
Yeah, exactly. Not that I'm getting to a ton of those guys. Like obviously Guerrero, Semien, Bichette are the guys I'm getting to the most. But I do think mixing those guys in and just getting sort of lower owned, cheaper players from Toronto is a pretty good way to go.
And then on the other side, we do have Nick Pavetta starting for the Red Sox. I know early in the day you had a little bit of interest in Pavetta just based on his ownership. Do you still feel that way? And is he making it into the lineups you've built so far?
Yeah, it looks like I'm right around the field on him right now. We have him projected for just shy of 4% ownership. I have 5% on DraftKings. I think the case to be made for Pavetta is that he has some of the best strikeout stuff on the slate with a 26.7% strikeout percentage this year. And he's not getting much ownership. The argument against him, of course, is that this Toronto lineup is very dangerous and just has a lot of really, really good hitters. Pavetta has good strikeout stuff, but he also walks too many guys, gives up home runs. So it's a real boom or bust spot. I don't mind being around the field or even a little bit over, but it's definitely not a spot that I think is necessary to take some giant stand and have a lot of money invested in Pavetta or anything.
Yeah, I think it makes sense from, an ownership standpoint, and then also that he does have strikeout upside. For me, I'm going to be pretty high on Toronto. I don't think I'm going to be getting to Pavetta. I don't have him in my current build. It really has more to do with the price point than anything else with that and the matchup. If Pavetta was cheaper, I think I'd have an easier time getting to him. But just considering that he's, still looking at a price point of 8,700 on DK, that's just a little bit too much for me to pay for him in this particular matchup. There's other guys like Joe Ross, who's cheaper and project for less ownership, and we project him higher, which, by the way, the player projections over at Awesemo.com, those are free today. That's just a spot I like better. So there's cheaper guys that I'm able to work in my lineups more that I prefer to Pavetta, and that's really where I'm at. I get that he's low owned and all that, but no real interest from me personally. But I mean, you just have him in a few lineups, so it's not like it's that big of a disagreement. But other side, Thomas Hatch is going to be starting for the Toronto Blue Jays. We have not seen Hatch make any big league appearances this year. He's been pitching just in AAA. He did make some appearances at the big league level last year. So Thomas Hatch last year, 2020, he pitched primarily out of the bullpen, made one start, 17 appearances overall, only pitched 26 innings. He did have a 2.73 ERA, but a 4.8 expected ERA. I don't really expect much from Hatch. He's 26 years old. He's not rated as a prospect. So just seems more of an organizational guy. What are you expecting from Thomas Hatch today against the Red Sox?
Yeah, so he went 5 innings in each of his last 3 appearances at AAA. I'm not expecting a lot in terms of success, but I do think if he's pitching relatively well, that we can get 5 or so innings out of him. Not really a necessary spot to go to, I don't think. It looks like he showed up in a couple of my lineups, like 2%. Just, I'm sure, spots where I'm paying up for bats everywhere, but definitely not anything that I'm really looking to get to. I wouldn't be upset at all if by lock I don't have any. Not confident at all, just kind of like the cheapest viable pitcher on tonight's slate, I guess.
Yeah, and we do have a comment in the YouTube chat about a potential pitch count for Joe Ross. Let me see, so I could credit who brought it up. Somebody asked what potential pitch count for Joe Ross coming. Oh, here it was. John Rosenberg asked Joe Ross may have a pitch count coming off injury. He didn't have a rehab start. I think that is a possibility, but once again, it's relative to current ownership expectations, and he's only projected for 1% ownership. And I think he's a better chance of being the optimal lineup than 1%. But Joe Ross isn't somebody who's going to be in like 30% of my lineups, but I'm going to be in more than the 1% the field has. But just to circle back on that, how big of a pitch count issue is that a concern? Is it a concern for you?
It's somewhat of a concern. I just don't really know how, I don't really know the answer to the question. Like, he threw 101 pitches in his last start before the injury, went 6 2/3. That was July 4th. So it's not like he missed a ton of time, but he missed enough where I wouldn't be surprised if he was somewhat limited. But the thing with Ross is that even if you get, like, let's say 75, 80 pitches, a lot of times you don't really want him to come back out for that final inning anyway. You kind of just want him to take his points and get to the bench. So I do think that's a concern. But like you were saying, the ownership kind of alleviates some of that. Like, if Joe Ross were getting 10, 15% ownership, I wouldn't be going there. I would just go to other guys. As is right now, I think it just sort of increases the range of outcomes for him, because There is some volatility. We don't know exactly how deep we'll go, but my assumption is that you're going to get something like 75 to 80.
Yeah, which, by the way, isn't really all that restrictive, right? I mean, we're talking about like one less inning, and then you factor in the price, the ownership. It's not really all that much of a concern for me. So I'm still going to be overweight to the field on him in tournaments. But circling back to the Toronto matchup, Thomas Hatch against the Boston Red Sox. So the Red Sox are picking up a lot of ownership today. They are currently projected to be the most rostered team on all of DraftKings, project for 16.3% ownership. So how are you weighing the potentially really strong matchup they have, even though we don't have all that much data on Hatch? It just seems like he's probably not a great pitcher. How are you weighing that against all the ownership they're currently projected for?
Yeah, I mean, it looks pretty safe to say I'll be coming under the field on Boston. Right now, for example, my highest owned Red Sox batter on DraftKings is Keuchel. I have 16%. We have him projected for 25%. So, not really getting close to the field on the higher owned guys on Boston. Normally, I'll have them mixed in on some lower owned stacks where my team's already contrarian. I can go to bats that just project really well, but they're projected to be pretty drastically over-owned here with a 16% ownership share compared to a 13.5% top stack percentage. I would much rather just be getting to Toronto and a couple of other teams.
Yeah, so the other thing, too, with Boston, when we talked about this team earlier in the day, there was guys towards the bottom of the lineup that weren't picking up that much ownership. Hunter Renfroe, if I remember this morning, was something like 3% projected ownership. Now he's up to 16. Alex Verdugo is projected for like 4% ownership. Now he's up to 8, which is, lower, but not on the lower end, but still more popular than he was. There aren't these guys in the single digit projected ownership like we had earlier, where it was like, okay, we can find a reprieve and we can make Red Sox stacks in a good spot and still get some reasonable ownership. That doesn't really exist anymore, unless you just want to rush, Frenchie Cordero and Michael Chavez, which, isn't the ideal roster build for me anyway, because then I'm just rostering bad players for the sake of lower ownership. So to me, I agree with you. Good spot for Boston. They're not so wildly overowned that I'm going to have 0 stacks of them. I'm just going to be well underweight to the field. I'm probably going to be somewhere in the range of about half the ownership the field has with the field at 16%. Is that kind of in line with where you are?
Yeah, that's how it's looking for me too. And I'm actually looking now, just kind of trying to see if I have like more so full Boston stacks or if I'm like mixing them in with other teams. And it looks like mostly I'm mixing them in with other teams. Like I have some 5-man Boston, but it looks like a lot of like 2 and 3-man where, I have a couple of Boston hitters and then just lower owned stacks around them.
All right. By the way, today show is sponsored by Jock Market. Guys, if you are new to Jock Market, different way to play daily fantasy sports. We're not looking at salary restraints. We're not building a lineup or anything like that. We're just bidding on players as if it's a stock market and the players are the stock. So there's an IPO period where you're bidding on the players, and then after the slate locks, you could buy and sell players based on how well they're playing after the games start. If you're new to Jock Market and you want to make your first deposit, head on over there. Use the promo code Awesemo. Get up to a $50 bonus on your first deposit. That is promo code Awesemo. So moving on to the next game now, we have Wade Miley on the hill for the Reds going up against Kyle Hendricks and the Cubs. So Kyle Hendricks, I don't think he's terrible. And I think sometimes I exaggerate a little bit when I talk about Kyle Hendricks, just because I think a lot of times we talk about players whether they're really good or really bad. It's relative to expectations that everybody has for those players. And Kyle Hendricks, I think, is, fine as like a middle-ish rotation starter in the big leagues at this point in his career, but there just isn't fantasy upside there. He has a 3.61 ERA, but a 4.69 expected ERA. The real big issue I have with him as a fantasy asset, 17.5% strikeout rate. So I just don't see enough strikeouts in Kyle Hendricks to generally ever want to roster him, and he's always expensive. So Kyle Hendricks is 9,700 today on DK. He's also projected for nearly 10% ownership. On FanDuel, he's 8,700 and projected for 7% ownership. This is, to me, just too much ownership for a guy who's fairly expensive and doesn't really have any upside.
So normally I'd agree, except for I ran lineups and I have like 21% on DraftKings. So it's kind of, I agree with everything you said. Like I would have said, I would make the exact same points I think I did this morning. The strikeout upside is not really there. The matchup is okay, but it's, nothing special, I don't think. And Hendricks just is a completely mediocre pitcher. I think what really stands out though, and is driving him up for me, is that looking at the top pitchers tool, he's got our 5th highest chance of being a top 2 pitcher. The 4 pitchers ahead of him, their ownerships are 32%, 48%, 19%, and 34%. Then you get to Kyle Hendricks at 7%. Granted, he is very clearly overpriced here, but I also am not really having any trouble finding cheap bats on the slate. So it's not that big of a concern. I think it's more important. It's just, more so, can Hendricks outscore guys like Marquez and Miley a high enough percentage of the time to be worth it? I don't love it, but it is just one of those spots where I don't really love a lot of pitching on tonight's slate. And I do think the ownership makes it worth it. So I'm not going to be excited about Kyle Hendricks, but it looks like he will be a pretty big part of my night.
So I am personally not going to be rostering Kyle Hendricks. However, I think you did make a point this morning. If I'm going to play devil's advocate against myself, if I'm just going to argue with myself using your words, I think you'd said the way that Kyle Hendricks lands in the optimal lineup tonight is not by Kyle Hendricks having some massive ceiling game. The last time he scored over 18 fantasy points was June 22nd against the Indians. It's been a month since he had over 20 fantasy points. That's not all that likely of a scenario, but the way that he could end up being in the optimal lineup, maybe he scores 15 fantasy points, but Shohei Ohtani struggles, walks a bunch of hitters, only makes it through a couple innings. Maybe a bunch of these guys priced around him just struggle. And then you get to a point where Kyle Hendricks and his, normal 12 to 16 fantasy points, that ends up being optimal just because all the other pitchers stock. I'm not going to be getting to Kyle Hendricks because that's generally not how I'm building my lineups on slates that have, more than a couple of games. And I'm still trying to target some upside that I don't feel that Hendricks has. But with that said, I think that there is a case to be made that, hey, if a bunch of these guys struggle, Kyle Hendricks is maybe a little bit less likely to struggle than some of these other guys. On the other side, though, even though I don't like Kyle Hendricks, I'm not really keen on stacking the Reds against him either. There are a lot of bad pitchers on this slate, and Kyle Hendricks, even if I don't think he's all that great, and I do think he's a little bit overrated, I do think there's better pitchers to target than Hendricks. He's fairly consistent. So red stacks, to me, I think they're going about appropriately on, not something I'm really dying to target. How about you?
Yeah, not looking like I'm getting too much of Cincinnati. Slight exception for Aristides Aquino, which it looks like I'm just using a decent amount as a one-off here. He's batting third. He's $2,200. He has power. So, that's, I think, a reasonable play just because of how cheap he is. But overall, barely getting to any Cincinnati.
Yeah, that's where I'm at. I'm not really getting stacks of them at the moment. But on the other side of the game, we have Wade Miley on the mound for the Reds. And Wade Miley is picking up a pretty decent amount of ownership, nearly 20% right now on DK. Over on FanDuel, Wade Miley, a little bit less popular at 5%. That's also because he has an absurd 9,600 price tag. That's kind of impossible to find much of a ceiling in. But on DK, Wade Miley is going to be a somewhat popular SP2 option. I don't really view him that much differently than Kyle Hendricks. Wade Miley's pitched a little bit better this year, but once again, a real lack of strikeout upside. And I still don't view Wade Miley as all that great of a pitcher. So I would rather stack the Cubs than get exposure to Miley.
Yeah, I'm coming in pretty close to the field on Miley, a little bit below at like 14%. And again, I think it's just a factor of he's relatively low owned compared to the other pitchers towards the top of the top pitchers tool. And there's just not a lot of pitching to like on the slate, but same issues as you brought up with Hendricks. Strikeout stuff, not really there for Miley. Has a 19.8% strikeout percentage this year. He has been pretty good in terms of just pitching. It's 3.74 xFIP this season. He does also benefit from the Cubs lineup tonight. No Javi Baez in the lineup makes it a little bit weaker. You have Matt Duffy batting cleanup, who I had no idea Matt Duffy was still playing Major League Baseball. The bottom of the order is not great with Marisnick, Nico Herner. So it's an okay spot for him. Again, I'm still not going to be excited about him, but you can't really point to too many pitchers on the slate that I will be excited about. And the ones that I will be are getting like 35+% ownership. So it's just, getting around the field on Miley. And then I think I am going to be overweight on the Cubs as well. We only have them projected for like 4% ownership on DraftKings. I'm getting around double that on guys like Rizzo and Chris Bryant.
Yeah, Bryant is the only player that's picking up any ownership today. He's at 10%. Everybody else is, really low ownership. We've got Rizzo 2% projected ownership, Wisdom 2%, and then guys like Marisnick, Nico Horner. These guys are also picking up 1%. I like the Cubs as a stack certainly more than the field does. It's a team that I am going to be on. Not a ton, but overall my highest owned stack right now is the Blue Jays. But Cubs, one of the contrarian stacks I like. I'm going to be overweight to the field. I also like the leverage that they offer off of Wade Miley. By the way, guys, if you haven't done it already, do us a favor, like the video, also subscribe to the YouTube channel because there's going to be other people giving DFS advice other than Adam and I on the YouTube channel today. We've got Live Before Lock coming up next, and then there is the PGA strategy show afterwards. So make sure to subscribe, stick around so you can watch all of that stuff as well, because there's a chance you might want somebody's opinion who isn't Adam and I. I don't know why, but listen, there's a chance that could be the case for you. Next game on the slate, and there's something really interesting to talk about here compared to FanDuel versus DraftKings, because the Kansas City Royals at home against the Chicago White Sox. Mike Minor, and let me just refresh ownership to make sure this is still the case. At least at the time we were starting, Mike Minor was the single most popular projected pitcher today on FanDuel, and that is still the case. Mike Minor projected for 25% ownership on FanDuel. So a couple of questions here, because I don't think either of us are going to agree with this. But first, why?
Do you want the name of the projection system? That's the reason why.
No, I'm just wondering. I'm just wondering. What do you think is the reasoning that he's picking up this much ownership?
There's a popular projection system that hasn't projected like 4 points higher than every other one.
Okay. Well, either way, we're going to say that it's not warranted this amount of ownership. But if he is going to be this popular, and keep in mind, keep updating the ownership projections, see how they change. Because early in the day when Adam and I are doing this, Shohei Ohtani was projected for 75% ownership on DK, but Mike Minor is so popular on FanDuel that if this actually ends up being the case, it's hard to not just love White Sox stacks today.
Yeah, and that goes for DraftKings as well, where he's getting 30% ownership. The White Sox right now, with everything the way it looks, are my highest owned stack on DraftKings. And it's not that I think Minor is bad. I think if you're just looking at Mike Minor, he's a perfectly fine play here. He has a 22.7% strikeout percentage this year, 4.39 xFIP. The matchup against the White Sox isn't great, but there are some strikeouts in that lineup. But the ownership is just, I think, pretty out of control here. And it makes me really like getting to Chicago, who we have projected with the third highest top stack percentage, getting slightly higher chance of being the top stack than they're getting in ownership. But then on top of that, you're just getting, on top of the little bit of positive leverage you're getting from the White Sox ownership, you're going, a third of the field is going to play Mike Minor apparently. So I'm getting to tons of White Sox right now.
Yeah, and then once again, also, depending on where that ownership settles with Mike Minor, we often see the chalk ends up being higher owned in single entry than it is in mass entry. So if he's going to remain this kind of ownership, certainly single entry on FanDuel, I think the White Sox are a really strong team to get to as a secondary stack. Oddly enough, Eloy Jimenez, for good reason, is going to be really popular. Do you think a lot of people are going to be building lineups with Eloy Jimenez and Mike Minor in them today?
I don't think so, because I think people kind of just use the same settings every slate and don't put a whole lot of thought into it, and so they'll probably not do pitcher against hitter. It's not the worst idea, I don't think, given how cheap Jimenez is actually I was going to say in cash games, but you're not playing Minor in cash games probably. So if you are playing Mike Minor in cash games, I think you can play Jimenez against him. But again, I don't think you need to go there. In tournaments, it's okay, but I still think with all the hitting options you have on the slate, you're probably better off just having one or the other.
And then we don't have an official lineup yet for the White Sox, but Eloy Jimenez, who's yet to play this year, Tony La Russa said yesterday that he expects Eloy Jimenez to be in the lineup today. He was dealing with, I believe, it was a torn pectoral muscle. He ended up having surgery on it. So we have not yet seen Eloy play this year. He is one of the top overall young players in baseball, and the price is just wrong on him today. He's 2,500 on DK. He's 3,000 on FanDuel. Now, once again, we need to see if he's in the lineup, but as of right now, he is expected to play today. As long as that is the case, it is hard for me to not get to a lot of Eloy, even though he's going to be pretty popular. The price is just so far off on him that he's going to be a really important one-off piece for me today.
Yeah, and in my case, I'm getting to so many White Sox stacks too. It's just driving him up even more. He's my highest owned hitter right now at like 60%. You can always make a case for coming under the field whenever a hitter's 25 or 30% owned on a slate with any reasonable number of games. But here it's more so it's easy to fit him into lineups and still be contrarian. And even just talking through my ownership so far, you can see, I'm overweight on Hendricks, which is a contrarian play. I'm overweight on Joe Ross right now, which is another contrarian play. So there's no real reason for me to be getting away from Jimenez at that price as well. And then I'm also just overweight on like every other hitter on the White Sox. So it's just driving up my Jimenez ownership even more.
Yeah, and then one other thing I'll mention about Eloy is something that I like to use a lot to look at players' historical talent levels is I'll just go back to the historical pricing and I'll see like, okay, what's a fair price for this guy based on where he was priced the last time we saw him play? Basically, the entire last month and a half of last season, Eloy Jimenez was priced in the high 4K to mid 5K range on DK. There's just no way he's going to be 2,500 again moving forward. It's kind of similar to remember when Wander Franco first got called up. He was min priced on FanDuel and DK. And even though he struggled a little bit, he's still not anywhere close to min price. We just know going forward, most likely if you're just playing these guys at a pretty good clip, especially if you play cash games, play Eloy, the price is just wrong. So Eloy, I think right now makes for the best overall value hitter on the slate. But talk to me about some of these other hitters in the White Sox lineup, because at least as the current ownership stands, they do look like a really, really good source of leverage.
Yeah. So, I mean, Jimenez, I think clearly top value, but you also have other value bats here with Andrew Vaughn at 2,600 on DraftKings. He's got plenty of power. Former, I want to say number 2 overall pick. Adam Engel, most likely hitting second at 3,300 is pretty cheap. And then you also get actual good hitters with Tim Anderson, Jose Abreu, Yohan Moncada, even though you prefer him from the left side, but you get a little bit of a discount on him as well compared to those other two. So it's still a pretty deep lineup that combines guys that have power and guys that offer value. And then looking at the ownership, like you're getting a lot going to Jimenez. You're getting about 15% going to Tim Anderson because shortstop's not a very strong position. Around 10% going to Abreu and Vaughn. After that, nobody's getting more than 5%. With Moncada's at 5%, Engel's at 4%. Everyone else is below that. So it's a team where, as far as full stacks go, it's pretty easy to still have a pretty good stack that isn't like drowning you in ownership.
And then one other thing I'm going to mention, because I brought it up this morning, while Eloy is going to be my most popular individual hitter, if you're building a lot of White Sox stacks, I would make sure that 100% of them don't include Eloy, because that's what the optimizer is going to spit out. If you're making X amount of White Sox stacks, they're going to give you a ton of Eloy just because he rates out so well as a points per dollar play. And while that is sensible, I want to make sure I have some White Sox stacks that don't have Eloy, because the majority of the field that is making White Sox stacks, they're going to have Eloy Jimenez in them. And while that is for good reason, you could build yourself a wildly different Chicago stack from the rest of the field that also has leverage that doesn't include Eloy Jimenez, because I'm going to assume that of the, X percentage of field that plays White Sox stacks, probably 90+% of them are going to have Jimenez in them, just like a rough guess based on ownership. So have you made any White Sox stacks that don't have Eloy in them?
Yeah, while you were talking, I was trying to kind of figure out what percentage of my White Sox stacks don't have him. There might be a way to do that quickly in Fantasy Cruncher, but if there is, I don't know how. But it looks like around 20% of my White Sox stacks don't have him. Like, I just clicked all of my lineups that have Jose Abreu, Moncada, Tim Anderson, and Andrew Vaughn, and Jimenez is in 79% of those. So I'm guessing somewhere around 20% of my White Sox stacks don't have him.
So the way to do it, by the way, is if you click on the team stacks tab, and then you click on the White Sox, the search thing, and then you click on players, it'll say what percentage of your lineups have each individual player. So it won't say which ones don't have Eloy, but you just figure like, oh, okay, I have 76% of my White Sox stacks have Eloy right now, so 24% don't. But that would be the easiest way to search them. But yeah, I'm probably going to have a handful of White Sox stacks that don't have Jimenez. Jimenez, I do anticipate, is going to be my most individually rostered hitter on the slate, just because I think he offers so much salary savings. On the other side of the mound, we're going to have Dallas Keuchel starting for the White Sox. Now, with Keuchel on the mound, something else that we mentioned this morning, I rarely roster Keuchel. I rarely stack against him. He's a pitcher who's pretty steady. He doesn't deliver spectacular results. His underlying numbers aren't good this year, but he's somebody who generally outperforms his peripheral stats. If you look at his last 3 seasons, this year is a 4.22 ERA, a 5.5 expected ERA. Last year, he had a 1.99 ERA, a 4.3 expected ERA. The year before that, 3.75 ERA, 4.63 expected ERA. Given the kind of soft contact he generates, he has a well below league average BABIP over the course of his career. He's somebody that I don't expect to really ever struggle relative to his peripheral stats. I think he's always going to outperform them. And so with that in mind, I think that Dallas Keuchel, he doesn't offer a lot of fantasy upside because he's such a low K rate, but I'm not all that keen to stack the Royals either, just because he's a heavy ground ball pitcher that doesn't tend to get blown up a lot. So you have a little more lineups built now. How do you feel about the Royals as a stack?
Yeah, pretty much not getting there. Like, I'm not getting the Keuchel, but I'm not getting the much Kansas City either. They're not offering really any leverage against the field because their ownership is projected to come in right about where it should be. Keuchel's not getting any ownership on his own. The one spot where I do think you can target Keuchel is with right-handed power, because he's only struck out about 12% of right-handed hitters this year. He's allowed an expected ISO to right-handed hitters of 189, I believe, off the top of my head. 189. So I think you can go there with right-handed power, but even so, I'm still pretty much just getting around the field on guys like Sal Perez, Hunter Dozier, Jorge Soler. They're right-handed power bats that can certainly take advantage of Keuchel, but there's also just a lot of other spots on this slate that I think look a little bit better.
Yeah, it's just also Dallas Keuchel. It's the 55% ground ball rate this year, and that's pretty, but 55.3, pretty much in line with his career average, 58.4% ground ball rate. So Dallas Keuchel, if you look through his game logs for the year, very few games where he's gotten blown up. He's allowed more than 4 earned runs twice the entire season. So just not a lot of games where teams put up gaudy run totals against them. The next game, a pitcher who does give up a lot of gaudy run totals, Matt Manning, is going to be on the mound for the Detroit Tigers against the Minnesota Twins. Earlier in the day, the Twins were the chalk play of the slate. They're picking up way more ownership than everybody else. They're still popular, but that's not quite the case anymore. I think earlier in the day, we had them projected for was like 18% ownership on DK. FanDuel, they were projected well over 20%. Now they're just slightly over 20%. I don't have anything positive to say about Matt Manning other than I rostered him last slate. It didn't go horribly. But he's now priced up to 5,800 versus 4,100 on DK. That makes him less viable as an SP2 option. I'm just kind of hoping he doesn't get totally slaughtered by the Twins. I think the Twins are a little more playable than they were this morning when they were projected for, a crazy amount of ownership. So I'm going to have them in my player pool, but probably only about 25% of what the field's rostering them right now. It's a good spot against Matt Manning. He generates almost zero swing and misses. Just a little bit too much ownership for my liking going to Minnesota.
Yeah, it looks like I'm coming in way underweight on them, which is pretty scary because Manning really has not been good in the majors, and this offense definitely has some guys that can hit in it. Also some pretty cheap bats, but not getting to much of them. Like, for example, right now we have Max Kepler, who I think is a very good value play, projected for 22% ownership. I have like 5%. We have Donaldson projected for 17%. I have like 3%. So it seems like a spot where I'm not getting to Manning, but I'm also just taking a lot of the ownership that's going to Minnesota and reallocating it towards Toronto and the White Sox, it seems like.
Yeah, that is something that I like as well, but I also agree. It is terrifying to not go heavy against Matt Manning. Like, I totally understand why the field is chomping at the bit to roster hitters against Matt Manning. He is a 5.79 ERA, 5.46 expected ERA. His strikeout rate is 10.5%, so just basically incapable of generating swing and miss at the big league level. He is only 23 years old. He was considered one of the top pitching prospects in baseball coming into the season, but even his AAA results this year were fairly terrible. 8.07 ERA, 6.49 FIP down in AAA. He had a 27.5% home run to fly ball rate. There are all kinds of red flags with Matt Manning right now. I just don't think that the Twins have some ownership or have the same odds of having the top scoring team as compared to their ownership. Because, I mean, especially on FanDuel, where you have them projected for 20.2% ownership. That is slightly better than the 23% from earlier today, but still, it's a team that I think is going a little bit over owned. But cash games load up on the Twins. And are there any individual hitters from the Twins that are making it to a good portion of your lineups?
No. I think the top plays are Kepler, Donaldson. Trevor Larnach dropped to 6th, but 2,800 on him is still a pretty good price tag. But they're just all getting ownership. And I think you had made that point this morning that it's not really that easy to find low owned guys in this lineup. 22% going to Kepler, 18 to Garver, 17 to Donaldson, 10 plus to Sano and Polanco as well. And then you're just looking to guys like Brent Rooker batting second, or you're moving on the lineup with Larnach, Simmons, Cave. So it's just pretty tough to make low owned Twins lineups that actually look good, I think. So I'm not really getting to much of any of them.
Yeah, it's just all of them are popular pretty much throughout the lineup. Although Brent Rooker, let me see. Do we have an ownership projection update on Brent Rooker?
9%.
I think that's actually reasonable. I wouldn't mind getting overweight to that number. Him hitting second in this kind of matchup. Although gut feeling, because the Twins lineup came out fairly recently, I think that probably goes up as we get closer to lock. But if he actually holds single digit ownership for a tournament purpose, Brent Rooker would be the guy that I'd be most interested in getting exposure to, because hitting second in this spot, that's not too bad of a situation.
Yeah. Projects to hit for decent power as well. 183 ISO projection from Steamer, 19 home runs at AAA for the Twins this year.
Yeah, and also favorable lineup spot. So we'll see if that changes going forward. But yeah, single digit ownership, that's some guy. Sign me up for Brent Rooker. But other than that, everybody's a little bit too popular for my taste. On the other side of the game, it is going to be Michael Pineda on the mound against the Tigers. And Pineda this year has been a little bit lucky, 3.93 ERA compared to a 4.56 expected ERA. The real big concern that I've had with Pineda throughout the year, a dip in velocity. It's also been a downward trend from him. 2017, 93.9 average fastball velocity. That went down to 92.6, 92.1, and now he's at 91 miles per hour this year. He's had a shoulder injury. He's had an elbow injury. He's been suspended for a sticky substance. That was like 6 years ago at this point. So he's somebody who is way ahead of the curve in terms of getting in trouble for having any kind of sticky substances on his fingers. But going up against the Detroit Tigers, a team that has fairly continually gotten ownership as of late. They've hit the ball really well over the last 6 weeks, but I think the field is just overcorrecting for not having exposure to the Tigers at the start of this stretch, because 12.6% projected ownership on DK for the Tigers, a little more manageable at 5.5% on FanDuel, but 12.6% for the Tigers, I can't get behind it. They're the third most popular stack on the slate. The only teams more popular are the Boston Red Sox and Minnesota Twins, and I consider both those teams to be in better spots and have better offenses. No thanks from me on the Twins today, on the Tigers today.
Yeah, third most ownership, seventh highest top stack percentage. It's not that I think Pineda is good. Like, I think it's a perfectly fine spot for the Tigers. I really like the salary on Akil Baddoo leading off at 3,200. Eric Haas batting fifth at 4,400 is a nice play. Candelario batting cleanup at 3,700 looks pretty good. It's just a good spot and a cheap team, but that's just going to drive their ownership up, I think, because they are a little bit underpriced here. And with the ownership that they're getting, I'm just not really getting there. I'm actually getting to more Pineda, which I don't feel good about at all. He's projected for 20% ownership. I have about 25% on DraftKings right now. It's, I think, just kind of a pricing play on him. There's nobody below his $6,900 salary that I have any level of confidence in. Not that I have a lot of confidence in Pineda, but when you're moving down that list, it's Spencer Howard, Derek McCollum, Matt Manning, Thomas Hatch are the pitchers that are cheaper than Pineda. So I'm getting some ownership there because the ownership going to the Tigers is kind of a nice bonus as well. And then just the fact that Pineda is kind of the cheapest pitcher that I can have any level of confidence in.
We do have a super chat here from Sam Van Dam. He's saying, noob question, does it matter if you're stacking a team and using their starting pitcher in the same lineup? So there is a little bit of positive correlation there, just in terms of obviously if the offense scores a whole lot of runs, the pitcher's more likely to pick up the win, but it's not something I specifically target in my lineups.
Yeah, same here. I don't go out of my way to get it. It's nice if it works out. There's certainly no reason to not do it. Obviously, you don't want to take stacks against your pitcher, but there is some positive correlation because if your stack scores 8 runs, like you're hoping they will, the pitcher's pretty likely to pick up a win as well. So a little bit of positive correlation, not something that I go out of my way to target though.
Yeah, I can't remember the last time I've ever done that. I mean, I'm sure there's been slates at some point where I've been like, oh, the pitching is bad today, but here I like this offense, so I'll roster the pitcher just because pitching options aren't good and there's a little bit of positive correlation I can get out of it. But yeah, that's not something I go out of my way to do pretty much ever, nor can I remember the last time I did it. So yeah, with that in mind, it's something that if you do it, fine, all well and good, but don't make that be like you have to do that in your lineups. I think you could handicap yourself a little bit if you're setting some kind of rule that you're forcing that in. Next game on the slate, it is going to be Shohei Ohtani pitching against the Colorado Rockies. Great spot for Ohtani. Also a wildly different pitching play than we talked about him this morning, because this morning we had him projected for 75% ownership on DK. Now he's come down to a much more reasonable level, 50% projected ownership. So with that ownership change, what do you make of him now, Adam?
I think he's easier to get to now. I'm not getting quite as much as I thought that I might this morning on the show. I had said that if his ownership dropped to 50%, I could see a situation where I end up with Ohtani in almost all of my lineups. Right now, he's my highest owned pitcher at like 57% on DraftKings, so slightly above the field, but not going too crazy there. I wouldn't be surprised or upset if that increases some before lock once I rerun it, everything for the final time, because it is a really, really good spot against Colorado. But it's still a lot of ownership going to Shohei Ohtani, even though I do think he deserves it. He has a 31% strikeout percentage this year, which is the highest on the slate by a pretty wide margin. The only real concern for him is his tendency to walk guys and drive up his pitch count. But this Colorado offense, outside of core, is just absolutely terrible. Like, to put it in full context, I looked earlier, Colorado, just for the entire season, not looking at where they're playing, they're 20th in baseball in WOBA. And that's a stat that doesn't factor in where you are playing. So when you're playing half of your games in Coors Field, you should not have a below average WOBA if you're any sort of competent offense. So just incredibly bad offense and a really good spot for the Cotton.
This is piggybacking off the super chat from before, because it's also going to be relevant to this game. We talk about the Herman Marquez on the mound for the Rockies, because a lot of people are going to like him. So this isn't exactly what Sam Van Dam asked in his super chat, but we did have a follow-up question from Eric Johnson in the YouTube chat where he said, can you do Ohtani and Marquez in the same lineup? I have no issue with that on DraftKings. It does relate to the super chat too. I don't care if starting pitchers are going against each other. Yes, there's a little bit of negative correlation in terms of obviously only one of them could pick up the win bonus, but to me, it's just not an issue for me.
Yeah, it's not for me either.
And then also with Ohtani, earlier in the day, I was looking to be underweight to the field on him just because he was 75% projected ownership. I'm likely going to be overweight to the field on him now that he's sub 50%. Great spot for him, especially against the Rockies. There was always a little bit of variance in Ohtani just because he could lose the strike zone at times and become a little bit erratic. But this Rockies offense, like you said, is so bad. I don't really have any interest in getting to the Rockies. Before, I thought they were worthwhile as a low-owned stack just because Ohtani was 75% owned. But not the case anymore. Is that a team that you're getting to?
Yeah, I'm getting very little here. I guess I'll probably be overweight, but that's because they're projected for 1% ownership. I have like 3% Story right now, like 4% Tapia. Nothing crazy at all. Just a couple Colorado lineups mixed in.
It is funny though when you mention it because they're so low owned that if the way you sort lineups ends up being like, okay, I have to get to 2% of them, that it does have you double the field on them. But
yeah,
either way, if you're somebody who plays, which is most of our audience, played 1 lineup, 3 lineups, 20 lineups, no reason to consider them. Just a possible leverage hedge situation. We're playing 150 lineups, but I don't anticipate myself making any Rocky stacks against Ohtani today. But on the other side of the mountain, we now have Herman Marquez, who's going to be a little bit more popular than he was this morning. 34% projected ownership on DK. That makes him the second most popular pitcher on the slate, only behind Shohei Ohtani, who's going up against. Over on FanDuel, though, we have Herman Marquez only projected for 7% ownership. I certainly like getting overweight to the field on him on FanDuel, but walk me through what you're doing with him on DK, where he is becoming pretty popular.
So right now I have like half the field on Marquez on DraftKings. I'm getting just shy of 20%. I wouldn't be upset if I got to more Marquez, but I also think it does make some sense if you're playing 150 lineups to be underweight, just because the pitchers around him in terms of top stack percentage, so Luis Garcia and Shohei Ohtani are just kind of in a category of their own. Then you have Wade Miley, Herman Marquez, Kyle Hendricks, all in that same, or all like between 18 and 22%, sort of in their own category. Miley's getting like half the ownership, or 60% of the ownership of Marquez. Hendricks is getting like 20% of the ownership of Marquez. And then you even have Joe Ross, who's a little bit further down, getting like, 1/15 of the ownership. So right now it kind of just seems like I've moved a lot of what would be Marquez to, in particular, Hendricks and Ross, and then also getting some Miley as well. If, with final ownership updates and lineups and all of that, if I do get to more Marquez, I wouldn't be surprised or upset, because I do think he is pretty easily the best pitcher out of this group. But right now it seems like the field agrees with that, and I'm not confident enough in him that I'm going to go overweight, or that I'm likely to go overweight on 33% ownership.
So I'm going to ask you then about the other side of the game. If you're going underweight to Marquez, do you have interest in stacking against him for leverage?
Yeah, which again, I don't like it, because I think Marquez is good. I don't like stacking the Angels when Ohtani pitches, because you're losing not only Ohtani's bat, but you're also losing the number 2 hitter in the lineup that you can't roster. So it kind of just screws up your stacks. But the Angels are pretty cheap. They do offer you some leverage against Marquez. I'm not getting the crazy amounts of them, but it looks like 8 to 10% on guys like Jared Walsh, Brandon Marsh. Just getting enough where I am going to put myself in a good position, it looks like, to, if Marquez struggles, to maximize my winning.
Yeah, the hitter that I have the most interest in for me is going to be Marsh, just because number one, he's really cheap, but then number two, he's very highly rated as a prospect. That doesn't always equate to having upside right away, and a lot of times we do see young hitters struggle when they first break into the big leagues. But there is at least some upside there. We did see Joe Adell was a young prospect and still want to consider one of the best hitting prospects on baseball. Got called up towards the end of the season last year for the Angels and really sucked at the big league level. But Marsh still, if you look at his overall rating right now on FanGraphs, he's ranked as the number 1 prospect overall in the Angels organization. He's ranked as the 13th best prospect overall in baseball. So I do think there's a little bit of fantasy upside there. Whether he actually reaches it this year, it remains to be seen. But low owned, really cheap price. I think that he is a hitter that's worth mixing into like 5 to 10% as a one-off. So Marsh is the hitter that I expect that I'm going to have the most exposure to from the Angels. If you guys want to get access to all the tools that Adam and I are talking about, specifically for baseball, top pitchers tool, that's something that's really valuable for me. Top stacks tool, anything related to ownership, I think it's invaluable to have for MLB DFS, and you can get access to that if you go and sign up for an Awesemo Plus MLB weekly package that is for $15.95. Or if you want to get access to DFS tools for every sport that's out there, you get an Awesemo Plus weekly pass for $29.95. And if you are new to Awesemo Plus and signing up for a weekly pass for the first time, use the promo code MLB Deeper Dive. That's all one word, all capital letters. And that will get you 25% off your first week of Awesemo Plus. Stop guessing, start winning. Join Awesemo today. All right, one game left on the slate, Adam, and then it looks like we're going to have a little bit of time. So if you guys have questions, fire those in, and Adam and I could start answering them for the last 5 or so minutes to close out the show. But Luis Garcia is going to be on the mound for the Houston Astros. Now, earlier in the day, both of us really liked Luis Garcia, and one of the main reasons was because we had him on the site project for more fantasy points than Shohei Ohtani, which is still the case. We still project for more fantasy points. However, he was also projected for way less ownership. Now the ownership gap is tightened a little bit. Ohtani project for 48% ownership. Luis Garcia project for 32% ownership. So how do you like him as a tournament play compared to Ohtani today?
I'm pretty close to the field on both. I guess I like Ohtani a little bit more. Like I have 57% Ohtani. I have 33% Garcia. Both pretty much in line with their ownership. I think that they're obviously the top two pitchers on the slate. They're both in good matchups. Ohtani's matchup's a little bit better. His strikeout percentage is higher. His price tag is lower. So I think all of that works in Ohtani's favor. Of course, the ownership is also higher on Ohtani. But it's a good matchup for Garcia, and he's been good this year. He's struck out 28.5% of hitters, which is second on the slate to Ohtani. 3.86 xFIP, just shy of 1 home run per 9 innings. And again, you just have plenty of strikeouts in the Seattle lineup as well. So no issues with Garcia. I expect they'll be around the field on him.
I'm kind of disappointed that we don't have the 75% owned Ohtani spot. Like that just would have been so interesting to make tournament decisions from. Not that it was a realistic expectation, but I really like the idea of getting to a ton of Luis Garcia earlier in the day to pivot off a little bit of Ohtani. So I'm still going to be overweight to the field on Luis Garcia, but not quite in the same way as earlier with the ownership difference we have now. But Garcia, I do think he's one of the best overall plays on the slate for cash games. I agree. I think Luis Garcia and Shohei Ohtani are the top two guys to get to on DK. I'm going to ask you, though, cash games on FanDuel now. Who would be the pitcher that you would want to get to if you were playing cash games on FanDuel? Just because we have Luis Garcia, Shohei Ohtani fairly close now in projected ownership, but Ohtani also being 11,000 compared to 10,000 for Garcia. Which of the two of them that are now current numbers would be the priority for you?
So the way I would kind of treat it is it depends on what bats fit into the lineup, but I don't have a strong preference between the two. Like I think 10K for Luis Garcia is fine. That's probably where I would start. I mean, granted, I would just use Fantasy Cruncher, but if you were like hand building a lineup, I would start with Garcia. I would put in bats and then kind of figure out, can I get from Garcia to Ohtani? Because I do think Ohtani projects better than Garcia, but I don't really think it's worth sacrificing a whole lot in the way of bats to get there. So it's kind of just depends on what you can afford. If salary doesn't matter, just play Ohtani, I think. But I wouldn't be making massive downgrades to my hitters to get from Garcia to Ohtani.
All right. And starting for the Seattle Mariners today, we have Darren McCaughan on the mound. So something else also, because when we talked about him this morning, there was no real data on here for him. He's pitched a total of 5 innings in the big leagues. He made 0 big league starts. And even though he only allowed 1 run in those 5 innings, the underlying stats were no good from that outing. He struck out 0 hitters. He had a 17.6% walk rate. It's actually crazy that he didn't end up, that he only allowed 1 run in those 5 innings. Then you look at his minor league numbers, also not a lot that leaves us inspired. Didn't generate strikeouts in AAA this year. He had a 3.97 ERA and a 5.56 FIP in AAA. I think this is a really good spot for the Houston Astros. Is there anything you've seen since this morning that changes your mind about McCaughan at all?
No, I still think it's a good spot for Houston. Just looks like a good control guy through the minors. Typically, your expectation when guys like that come to the majors is that they're going to struggle because you're just facing hitters that are much, much better. And if you don't have the stuff to strike out minor league hitters, you're probably not going to start striking out major league hitters. And he was just getting by on, putting pitches in the strike zone, not hurting yourself and letting minor league hitters get themselves out. That's not really a recipe for success at the major league level. Doesn't get a ton of ground balls either. So most of the time when pitchers like him come up, it's just a matter of time before they end up doing really poorly. There are always exceptions. Like, for example, some guys are more deceptive than others, and you obviously can't pick that up from looking at FanGraphs or anything like that. But typically profiles like this just don't do very well in the majors. I'm definitely not shying away from a team like Houston against them.
No, I think Houston, a little disappointed that the ownership has come up on them since this morning, because they did look like they were going to be fairly contrarian when we were looking at the team in the morning. But any individual Houston hitters that are making it into a good portion of your lineups?
Looks like I'm kind of just around the field on them, like 10% to all the good hitters pretty much. Brantley, Tucker, Altuve. Only like 5% Correa. So I guess I'm actually getting and 4% Alvarez. I guess I'm actually underweight on Houston right now, which I don't love, but again, it's just because I'm getting so much exposure to the White Sox and the Blue Jays right now. It's pulling from Houston. I think that as we get closer to lock, if like Mike Minor's ownership projection were to come down, I start losing some White Sox. That probably starts to get me more Houston.
All right. If you guys have any questions, we have about 4 minutes left until we switch the show over to MLB Live before lock. So stick around. You guys don't want to miss that. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. Like us. That really helps us with the YouTube algorithm, helps us draw an audience, keeps Adam and I on the air, helps keep the show free. So do us a favor and do that. Also, firing questions if you guys have them. Before that, though, did you see the White Sox lineup?
Yeah. Eloy Jimenez batting cleanup. Andrew Vaughn up to 2. Adam Engel down to 6. Pretty much the hitters that we expected, just in a different order. Sebi Zavala in there in place of Zach Collins. I think the only thing that was unexpected.
Yeah, that in the lineup shifted a little bit. Like you said, Engel batting 6th. I wasn't really expecting to see Vaughn batting 2nd. Eloy batting cleanup, though. Maybe a little bit of fears kind of go away with that, just because I think there were some people who were maybe a little skeptical whether Eloy would actually end up being in the lineup or not. But yeah, no issue with that. Eloy, Jake Nunley just asked that in the YouTube chat. Yes, Eloy is starting. He's batting 4th. This is going to be his first game of the season this year. Have you looked at his minor league stats at all?
He didn't play, as far as I can tell.
Interesting. Does that give you any sort of concern?
Not that isn't going to be alleviated by a $2,500 salary.
Yeah. So actually, he didn't have that many. I have it up now. He had a total of 10 at bats in 10 games in AAA, 2 games in A ball. So he actually only had a 77 WRC plus in his 10 games at AAA, but once again, small sample size, not all that concerned. Then a 252 WRC plus in A ball. So all in all, if you put those numbers together, he was probably a little bit above average, but whatever, the price tag, that's not going to really change anything about how I view Eloy Jimenez. And let's see. We have Adam. I'm not going to try to butcher. I'm not going to try to pronounce your last name because I'm going to butcher it. But Adam in the YouTube chat said Eloy had 50 plate appearances in the minors. Yeah, 41 in AAA, 8 in A ball. So here's one thing I'm going to bring up. Looks like we don't have too many questions coming in right now in the YouTube chat. So I'm going to go over to the betting model we have over at Awesomeo.com. I think it's a really good way to try to find some value in sports betting. Primarily with the prop betting, I think that's where we find some of the best value in MLB, specifically the strikeout props. If you just look at our betting model, by the way, something that's also useful to look at is sometimes just looking at it and telling you what to not bet. So there are actually no individual teams that rate out as really positive ROI bets for today. But looking at the MLB top props tool, I'm going to find whichever pitcher has the best strikeouts prop, and I'll get your reaction to it, Adam. So right now we have as the best overall prop on the slate, and this is one that actually I'm going to like quite a bit too. Spencer Howard for under 4.5 strikeouts. We have that with a 29% expected ROI. The reason this is a strong bet, and it's not because Spencer Howard is a bad pitcher, I just don't think he's going to work deep enough into the game to be able to reliably get 5 or more strikeouts.
Yeah, I agree with that. And it's also not like it's a great matchup for him either.
Yeah. So, I mean, Spencer Howard, we talked about him before as a potential DFS play. He's been fairly limited throwing, in the neighborhood of like 40, 50 pitches or something like that. That's going to make it really hard for him to strike out a ton of guys unless he just goes nuts in the first couple of innings. This is one that I think is funny. I always feel uncomfortable when players have really low strikeout totals, but Matt Manning, we have under 3.5 strikeouts with a 20% expected ROI. Matt Manning, if you look at some of his numbers for the year, just not generating swing and misses whatsoever, walking nearly as many guys as he strikes out. So under 3.5 strikeouts for Matt Manning. It is a low number, but how do you feel about that, Adam?
Is there what's the odds?
It's minus 134 for under 3.5.
Like 3.5 seems about right to me, I think.
Yeah, it is a low number. We do have with a 20% expected ROI on the under, but that is just about going to do it for us. So any closing thoughts you have on the slate, Adam?
Just, I guess, to reiterate what I'd said at the beginning of the show and this morning, and I think it kind of probably came through even as I was, kind of talking about games. This is a slate where like there's not a whole lot to be confident in performance-wise from like individual pitchers or really individual offenses. But so I think it kind of just sets up as a slate where like more so than normal, I'm just doing the opposite of what I think the field is doing in a lot of spots.
All right, that is going to wrap it up for us. Guys, do us a favor, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and stick around because Live Before Lock is coming up next.
All right, welcome in as we are live before lock, 58 minutes before this slate lock. So you better pay attention to everything, not what I have to say, but what Eric has to say coming up. And maybe there might be one or two gems that I throw out, but I just don't want people to expect that. They've come for Eric Lindquist, and we will reward. We promise you that. Jordan's in the house producing, so make sure you give him a shout in the chat where you should have already liked the show. You should already be subscribed. If not, then do those two things, the notification bell, so you're not late for a Live Before Lock show. And we'll tell you all about Jock Market, our sponsor. They've got a couple of great opportunities for you to jump in. And our free tool tonight, the premium tools and data that are free to you, MLB player projection. So we have a lot happening, but nothing happens without Eric first and foremost. What's up, brother?
What's up, my guy? It's been a while. I haven't seen you in a while other than on your show, The Middle, which I've checked out a couple of times. So you're posting that up on the Twitter, and I've enjoyed watching that. So you've got a lot of personality. I love the Philly guys. I love the sports betting content. And again, that's kind of really a big part of what we do here at Awesemo in addition to the DFS. So you want to be checking out any of the content there, but Eytan does a great job with that. So check that out. Give it some likes.
Oh, look at that, man. We got to get you on now after all of that.
No, I just wanted to give you a shout because again, it's been a long time. And plus you've got to provide for a child. What am I doing? I'm providing for myself, the child. Like, it's a little bit different. No. Don't think that for any reason, just because I'm a father now, that I'm no longer a child. My wife is the one who has the two children in the house, me and the kid. So I'm wake up in the middle of the night and you're like, just crying in the corner. It's
that
fun.
Used to be me, but now he's taken over. The kid has taken over that role, so I can't get any sympathy at 3:30 in the morning. By all means, no. Look, the last time we worked together, I don't even know if I had the kid. So at the very least, like I'm up and running, it's not like I'm a complete and total mess. I don't look any worse than I normally do, which I know is shit, but still, like, it's not like fatherhood has crushed me 5 weeks into it. There's hope.
Yeah, there's light at the end of the tunnel here. I was going to say, you just got to get to the sports age. Like for me, if I could like skip the first, well, I say this now because I'm not a father. I'm very much looking forward to it. I think I've been ready to be a father since I was like 21. I'm 33 now. And it's like, oh, I had to find the right girl is kind of the way that I looked at it. But for me, if I could fast forward to like the age where I can take them out on a golf course and, go kick it, like when they're 3, 4, I would hit that button, I think immediately.
See, you think like I think. And before we get to your immediate thoughts here on this 7-game slate tonight and we get live before lock, everybody's questions and comments for Eric, I felt bad because so many people were coming up to me and saying, hey, man, cherish these, he'll never be an infant again. He'll never be a newborn again. He's 5.5 weeks old. He doesn't do shit but shit. Like, yeah, I'm with you. I want to hit the fast forward button. I want to teach him how to do all the stuff that I couldn't do and then live vicariously through him and yell at an official as, he doesn't get a call. I want to do all of that.
Yeah, I want to have an actual conversation with my child as opposed to what do you want from me? I don't understand this foreign language you're speaking. Yeah, so I'm with you.
All right, my brother. We've got a lot to get into, including answering as many questions as we possibly can on the chat. Super chat is not required, but of course, it's the best way to get our attention. Overall, tonight, and I know my squad's out there. We'll look around, go from pitchers to stacks to individuals, but just looking overall at the slate tonight, not necessarily jammed with games. What jumps out at you from just an overall picture?
So I think there's a lot of value bats that people are kind of all flooding into the same spots. So we have Eloy Jimenez. It's a misprice, 2.5K. He's hitting cleanup against any lefty. Mike Minor, a decent enough pitcher. I've liked him in the past. I liked him with Texas. This season, limiting hard contact, doing kind of what he normally does, but a 442 expected slugging, doesn't really miss bats, limits the walks, but I don't know. This White Sox team, you've got him, and now you've got Andrew Vaughn also at 2.6K. I'm very interested to kind of see where the ownership lands on them now that we've officially got him in the lineup and Andrew Vaughn obviously getting moved up to the 2-hole. I think that's going to be fascinating. And then seeing where the stacks kind of come into on this Toronto-Boston game. I mean, it's got a massive total. Nick Pavetta has a notorious home run problem. Thomas Hatch on the other side going up against this offense that's just been in fuego here for the Red Sox. Just a sick lineup up and down. I just am very interested in the next 15, 20 minutes now that we've got every lineup except for the Rockies, which for me doesn't matter all that much at the current ownership we have for Ohtani. I want to see where some of these value bats come in. I'm disappointed because Aledmys Diaz got activated off the IL. He's 2.1K and he's not in the lineup for Houston tonight. I thought he might be in and like a guy like Toro wouldn't be in there, but ended up being Toro again, 2.7K. He's been serviceable here for Houston at the hot corner, but I'm very curious to see where some of these value bats come in because I think the pitching is pretty straightforward, more so than other slates. I mean, you're looking for cases to get off certain guys, but Garcia, Ohtani, Marquez, they are just so discernibly higher for me. A little bit of Wade Miley thrown in there. And then I'm taking cheap shots on the same two dudes over and over and over again in Matt Manning and who was the other guy that I had? Michael Pineda. Both of the pitchers in target field. So that's kind of my quick slate overview on everything before we dig in. But I want to get away from some of those super popular cheap bats because I just think that might be the leverage that you need in a massive tournament tonight.
Okay, so let's start with the pitchers and especially with the guys that you mentioned right there at the top alongside our projections on site for landing on DK, the top two pitchers, Garcia and Ohtani really in that order. But I do wonder, because you mentioned how straightforward it is clearly with what you're offered in front of you on the slate, but how do you maneuver through ownership? I mean, half the slate right now is projected to own Ohtani, which isn't the end of the world, but yeah. I do wonder, and I'm using DK numbers here clearly, but I do wonder if, especially in tournaments where you're looking to pivot away from the obvious simply because of ownership.
I think it's walking a fine line today, just because of how biased I am towards Ohtani pretty much all the time. The guy just absolutely he's an absolute bona fide stud. Everything he does is pretty fantastic. If he's not walking dudes, you're going to need Ohtani today. That's what it comes down to. This Colorado team provides very little resistance in ways of making contact. I mean, their WRC plus against right-handed pitching for the season is 70. 70. That is 11 runs created lower than Arizona, the second worst team on the board. I mean, Colorado on the road especially is just an abysmal baseball team. And you can point to some things where they had a decent enough outing against who? I think it was David Price night, where they went up against the Dodgers. I can't remember exactly, but it wasn't some stud out there on the mound. This Colorado offense is abysmal. And the only way that Ohtani gets into trouble tonight, the only way period, is if he's walking dudes. Because if he's not, his splitter, everything that he does is going to direct this. There's nothing Colorado can do to stop from striking out and swinging and missing with the guys that they have in this lineup. It is not an imposing lineup whatsoever. And Ohtani limits a lot of the damage in spots. A 197 expected batting average to go along with a 31% K percentage. I mean, he's just the best guy, and he's underpriced at his number.
EMAC has infiltrated the chat with his join the resistance hashtag, suggesting that we go.
Hey, EMAC, shut up. How about that? You're not on the show. How about that? Shut up.
I didn't know if maybe the two of you had a bad moment on the last show you worked together, and this is his way of just coming back and
we worked together yesterday. You know, he's just coming in. He's trying to create ruckus. I mean, here's the thing. There's always something to be said about having a stack on the other side of your pitcher. It's very, very easy to go in if you're playing in the $5 on DK today. If you're making 20 lineups, 50 lineups, 100 lineups, 150, whatever it is, have a couple Rockies if you really want to on the other side, because the amount of ownership you should have on Ohtani in this spot, it's massive. Like, I'm going to have a massive amount of Ohtani. I saw he was like 75% earlier in the day. I mean, that was never going to happen, even on a slate where there's only 14 pitchers, but it's hard not to imagine getting to that much because of how well this spot sets up. If you play this slate out 100 times, I guarantee you the top two pitcher percentage that we have there might even be a little bit higher than what we have listed. I think it's a little bit irrational how good of a spot this is for Ohtani.
So where else then are you flexible? Because clearly your allegiance to Ohtani, the numbers will back it up. Nobody's moving you off of this Ohtani rock tonight, no matter how much we try. All right, Eric. So I've worked with you long enough to know that you're a man of conviction, and that if you come out in the first 10, 15 minutes of a show and say, damn it, this is what I'm doing, hands up. But where else then do you become flexible, maybe with ownership, again, kind of pivoting away from the rest of the field? Garcia, you mentioned right away, he's a little bit higher as far as our predictive on the top pitcher tool for being one of the top two across the board tonight.
So Luis Garcia freaks me out a little bit, and I like Luis Garcia. So I'm playing that screwball, that 150 over on DK today. It's like a 3 max. It's probably the best contest that I've seen DK put out in a long time. It looks fantastic. I'm excited for that tonight. I say that now, of course, but last time out, Luis Garcia looked awesome. It was also against a watered down Cleveland team that did not have Jose Ramirez. He looked fantastic. There's no denying it. 31.7 DK points, but we've seen even against Oakland, Baltimore, Detroit, there hasn't been like the 25 DK point, 30 point fantasy point outing to really like blow the slate up. And as the most expensive pitcher, you go across and, you know, he limits a lot of damage, 363 expected slugging on the season, 212 expected batting average, 28.5% K percentage is nice. It's not like the most elite number that we're looking at. I mean, Ohtani's a couple points higher and he gets the Colorado bump that I just don't think there's a lot of trouble that can get created by Colorado in that spot. Luis Garcia, 10-4. I think looking at the top stack percentage, you kind of have to keep you have to keep it in sync. If I want to get to Toronto and Boston, it's going to be harder for me to get to Luis Garcia. And right now, seeing the top stack percentage we have on Toronto of 13.6%, I think that directly affects me from getting to as much Luis Garcia as what I was expecting earlier in the day. Seattle also, they're fine. Like it's not an imposing offense by any means, but I think there's enough guys in this lineup that can create some damage. I think it's a little bit riskier at 10-4 to go to him than what it is to go to 9,200 for Ohtani. So I think between those two, I think the ownership should be a little bit more extreme than what it is, even at 50% Ohtani and 33% Garcia. But I totally get it. Garcia is a great play if you can get up there and still get off of some of these super value stacks. Because I'm telling you, the White Sox and Minnesota in our next run are going to be even higher than what they are because of the way these lineups came out.
So off that note there, just looking at the other options, especially if paying up is going to be classified tonight on this slate as paying the 9,200, let's say on DK for Ohtani. You mentioned Miley and a couple of other names in there where you're simply just paying a little bit less. If it's 8,600 for Miley, right, 8,400, or even down to Pineda, where you mentioned 6,900. I am curious, though, as far as Mike Minor is concerned, 8,300. We do have him pretty high owned, but that's underweight, or pardon me, that the field is over to where we have him projected at about 15.2 in that top 2 percentage, but he's nearly 30% owned right now on this run through.
I think the tough part about this slate is projecting out Miley, Minor, and Joe Ross. So Joe Ross, I don't know what that pitch count's going to look like. And I think somebody had alluded to it in chat on the last show. That was kind of my major concern with him. He hasn't pitched since July 4th. He has not pitched since the 4th of July. He had some elbow issues as well. He was on the 10-day injured list. I have no idea what the pitch count is. We haven't seen a number. I'm going to just put 80 there. And I think at 80 pitches, he's still viable at that number. But I'm not excited to be rostering him. He's coming in by far the lowest owned out of that grouping. And would it shock me if he outperformed from a strikeout perspective up against Philadelphia, Minor or Miley? No, it would not. It would not surprise me at all. But I just think that Wade Miley and Mike Minor see more pitches. I think the opportunity for to beat them is there. I think at 7,900, if you're playing Joe Ross, you're basically saying, I think Miley, Minor, and Marquez all fail, which I don't find to be super likely. So I'm not playing Joe Ross today in any lineups. I understand the play if you want to be doing that. I think with this top stack percentage, that makes me a little bit more I wouldn't say bullish, because I'm definitely not going to roster him, but I think that gives you more hope if you want to be going there. If you need 7,900, I would just choose to go even further down to Pineda, or God forbid, Matt Manning, who I'm going to be playing a little bit too. And, just kind of hold your nose and go from there. But that whole middle range, Mike Minor's fine, but we're going to see some White Sox ownership come up with the way that lineup came out. And Wade Miley with under a 20% strikeout percentage on the season, going up against a Cubs team that isn't watered down yet. Not completely watered down. You still have Contreras, Bryant, Rizzo. Duffy in the 4 hole is a weird thing to look at, but Patrick Wisdom has some pop, Bodie, Marisnik. It's not a watered down Cubs team. I think I would be more inclined to play more Cubs than more Miley, but both sides of that I see being viable.
Don't discount how bad the Phillies bats can be tonight, even with warm, humid weather.
Yeah.
And just how inconsistent they can be.
Have you ever liked the Phillies on a slate that we've worked together?
No. I feel like it's my duty to provide balance here. I don't know. Is Lofty all like Phillied up and just no matter what any Philadelphia team plays, just looks at him with these eyes of, no, I mean, he's critical. He's been on my shows critical. I don't know if he's like that with the Phillies, but I don't trust the Phillies. I have trust issues with the Phillies. That's all I would say.
You've been
sure as hell I'm not
going to
roster
times.
Howard.
It's the girl you dated in high school that, was rotating around boyfriends. And then you decided, that you just had enough. You had enough and you couldn't do it anymore. Couldn't.
You sound like Ben Simmons with Kylie Jenner.
Oh, I have no idea that that's a thing. And I listened to some Ben Simmons. I've never heard him talk about Kylie Jenner.
It was a thing. He was the only one who had a problem with her in an open relationship. Everybody else was cool with it, right? Everybody else was all good with it, but he wanted to wife this woman who was just chilling and living her best life. So that's all.
I thought that was Katie Holmes for him back in the day. He was like obsessed with Katie Holmes, but that's a
Ben Simmons.
Ben Simmons. Oh, Ben Simmons basketball. I was thinking Bill Simmons podcast. That was an oopsie.
I don't think
it was a Bill Simmons,
Simmons,
Ben Simmons. My brain is still fried from that New Orleans and Memphis trade that made absolutely no sense today, but I digress.
Fair enough. All right. Before we wrap up on a couple of pitchers, especially kind of down there, reminder, the MLB player projections are free for you. And as Eric mentioned at the start, we have not one but 2 new YouTube channels for you to subscribe to. You should already be subscribed here to the big one, the mothership, but also beyond DFS, we're going season-long fantasy football and sports betting. So click the link pinned in the YouTube chat to subscribe to these channels and make sure you turn those notifications on too as well. You want to make sure that you are not late or missing anything from sports betting to fantasy football content constantly around the clock. Everybody at Awesemo working overtime in order to prepare you for the heavy bet and DFS play with fantasy football coming up. And make sure you're taking advantage of everything that we have, of course, on Awesemo.com. Reminder, of course, the fantasy football and sports betting channels that we want you to subscribe to as well as here. All right. So lastly, just from a pitcher standpoint and kind of looking at this more so from FanDuel, because I know that there is always the interest here as far as narrowing this down. So who do you anticipate getting to the most when it comes to your FanDuel pitcher, Eric? And then to back that up, who is your best pivot away from that?
So I'm not playing a ton on FanDuel today. I've got a little bit of exposure. Let me just pull up what I have for my numbers here. So yeah, I'm getting to the most. If Luis Garcia being $1,000 less than Ohtani makes it kind of a little bit of a different ball game. I mean, you look over at DK and it's like, come on, it's just kind of backwards. If you flip-flop their salaries, I think this slate would become much more interesting. Make Ohtani 10-4 and make Luis Garcia 92. You can make Luis Garcia 10K on DK as well. But over on FanDuel, where he's $1,000 cheaper than Ohtani, Luis Garcia definitely sticks off the page. But now the ownership is started to get to where I expected it to, where he's a little bit higher in our top pitcher tool. I would probably be more inclined to take the path less traveled with Herman Marquez. Herman Marquez has actually surprisingly had a higher ERA on the road than he has at home at Coors Field. The guy's predominantly a ground ball pitcher. That's the big part of playing in Coors Field and being successful, but he's missing bats more on the road. I think that that's going to give him more of a bump than his 24.7% K percentage. The Angels also just aren't a very good baseball team, not a great hitting team. Getting Adam Eytan in there where he strikes out less than 25% is actually a plus, which is strange to say considering you have Marsh, Walsh, Upton, Ohtani. They all have north of 25% strikeout percentages. I really like this spot for Marquez. And so I wanted to throw him out there. I have a pretty condensed pitching pool today. Marquez is a big part of what I'm doing in a lot of my 3-max stuff, because I think that even with Ohtani there, maybe one of them gets the win, maybe one of them doesn't. I'm not factoring that in, but I think the strikeouts are definitely going to take a little bit of a jump for me in the, going up against this Angels lineup for Marquez, which just gets me excited to play both of them and just hope this is like a 1-0 baseball game. And I think there's a very realistic chance that it could be. So I like the under in that game, and I love both pitchers.
All right, let's get this ratio up here as we're over 1,000 people watching, less than 200 likes. So we want to make sure that we can kind of balance that out. If you're just popping in, you're new to what's happening here on the baseball side of Awesemo, we got you covered across the board. Eric is in the house. Make sure you're following us both here on Twitter. You can see the handles if you have anything following up tonight. Super chat is open as well if you have anything specific that you desperately need answered before lock. All right, is there anybody else? You covered Joe Ross. Maybe that's could be classified as a sleeper. We talked about Mike Minor as well, especially with the heavy ownership. Nick Pavetta, you did kind of briefly talk about the home run machine that can be up there. Keuchel's on the board a little bit later. I don't imagine that you're getting, I wouldn't physically let you get to Spencer Howard tonight. So I can't imagine that there are many people on the bottom end from a cost standpoint that you're rushing to get to, maybe even in tournaments.
I think Spencer Howard would agree that Spencer Howard can't pitch enough innings in order to be viable in this spot. From a DFS perspective, 42 pitches he had in his last start. That was 5 days ago against the Yankees. Only 42 pitches. There's not a chance he's going to show up in one lineup that I have. I would absolutely be writing him off. Yeah, there's no way to be playing him. It's not remotely viable. That's why you're seeing him at the bottom of the top pitchers tool. Then we've got Matt Manning. So let's talk about Matt Manning. This is probably the gross, disgusting play of the day that I have in large field tournaments. Not going to be major invested in him anywhere else, but Matt Manning was like the 13th or 14th top prospect in baseball. He had a pretty high K percentage when he was in AAA, and that is just not translated whatsoever here. But this is a Minnesota team that is absent of Nelson Cruz. And if you're going to speak ill of your team, I'm going to speak ill of my team. Okay. We have Brent Rooker in there with a 40.5% K percentage, Jake Cave 38.1%. Those are gigantic numbers. Miguel Sano, 37.1. He strikes out more than any qualified batter in Major League. Like, sign me up for, I mean, there are so many Ks that exist here. Trevor Larnach, 33.3 percentage. Again, limited number there, 132 balls in play, 151 for Sano here, or total attempts there. But, I mean, those are massive strikeout numbers. Garver in there is north of 30% this season. He's generally been around there for his career. I just think that there's a ton of strikeouts up and down that lineup in certain spots. And, you're not going to get a lot of Ks on Kepler, Donaldson, Polanco, Simmons, but if you can pick up 4 or 5 here and there, Matt Manning could be very sneaky just at his price in order to get to more Toronto exposure. I hate it, but I mean, I pulled Toussaint out of a hat yesterday. He ended up being way higher owned than I expected for what it's worth. I don't think that that's the case today. I think you get a very low Matt Manning, but at 5,800, he's the only guy underneath 7K that I'm remotely thinking about other than Michael Pineda on the other side.
Okay, fair. Yeah, and that's where I think the fair play would be in there. And that's why I was just curious in case we wanted to mop anybody else up. Keuchel, any thoughts lastly on him before we move on from pitchers?
He's just never a very interesting DFS guy. Ground ball pitcher, that's helpful. He's the kind of guy that I just hate stacking against because it just seems like he limits the hard contact and the exit velocity, and a 5.1 degree launch angle in the season is pretty darn exceptional. Like, keeps the ball down in modern baseball. That's a big plus, but still a 463 expected slugging. It'd be death by a million cuts, only a 14.6% K percentage. Basically what you're doing there is you're just kind of hoping the rest of the range fails, which is totally likely. I'm not going to say that it's unlikely, but I would rather just find the money to get elsewhere on the board. I'd rather get up to Marquez, Miley. I'm not going to have any shares of Dallas Keuchel today.
All right, let's move to some stacks here as we'll get an individual kind of bounce around. Again, you have anything specific here for Eric, make sure you hit us up. Super chat, again, not necessary best way to see Terry now jumping in on Spencer Howard. See, it's nobody in Spencer Howard's family would tell you to roster him, and Terry has confirmed that. See, so it's not just me coming down on my squad. Boston right there at the top. So let's just start off with as general of an approach as we can. We have Boston on site. Alex's top stack tools as the number one stack. What does Eric Lindquist have as the number one stack tonight?
I have Toronto as the number one stack today, but I have Toronto the number one stack most days. It comes down to home run opportunity that exists in that lineup. You look at some of the expected sluggings here. Vlad Guerrero, 608. Teoscar Hernandez in the 5-hole, 509. 486 Bo Bichette, 465 Springer, Simeon, even Randall Grichuk, 425 expected slugging. They all just murder the baseball. Every single one of those guys I just listed off, 40% hard hit percentage, north of 40%, north of 44%, in fact, as I'm pulling that up here. It's a ridiculous amount of power for the Blue Jays. If they're ever going under-owned just because they're expensive, that is the time that you want to be invested in this baseball team. Coming in around 10% ownership share on DK, let's bump that up a little bit. And I think that just having Ohtani at 9,200, if you're willing to, you can go him and Marquez. Again, that's my preferred pairing with Toronto. I think that there are enough outfielders that are cheap enough. Springer, Hernandez, neither of them over 5K. That's useful. Randall Grichuk and Gurriel. Again, I'd much rather go to Grichuk than Gurriel there, and I just talked Gurriel into hitting a bomb for sure. But I absolutely love Toronto in this spot going up against Pavetta, and Pavetta's fine. He's definitely got the K potential there, 26.7%. But you look at this Toronto team, they just simply do not strike out. 21.5% K percentage, second best in baseball, 114 WRC plus, both of those numbers up against right-handed pitching for the season. That is just an exceptional team here, and he's got a home run problem. Nick Pavetta lets the ball get up in the air, 16.7 degree launch angle on the season. Let me just take them over Boston. And again, I love Boston. It's hard not to, but so does the field. I would much rather find the way to get to Toronto than Boston today.
All right, so looking beyond that, right, and you mentioned as far as ownership is concerned, it's not even as dominant as one may expect. Granted, with only 7 games, you're going to have the 14 different stacks here to choose from, but it's pretty spread out. Like, yes, Boston has 3 necessarily ownership share points higher than Minnesota. Clearly, difference a little bit in cost, but you've got 5 teams, if I can do math really quick, that are over double-digit projections for ownership. So it's not like people are just loading up on Boston or loading up on Toronto tonight on DK lineups. And it may be the White Sox or Houston where we have, or maybe there is a long shot kind of in the middle with Detroit just to kind of follow up with the field, or you go completely opposite, right? And you take somebody like Washington, where nobody compared to the other squads is owning them tonight as a stack. Or not many people, I should say.
Yeah, no, not many people. And something that Adam talks a lot about with this Boston team too is just finding hitters, or with Toronto or with any expensive stack or any popular stack, is finding the guys that are going a little bit under-owned. So I do have one of my 3 lineups that I'm putting in my 3 max stuff that is a Boston stack. And I'm going to have to rework it here a little bit because Diaz was a one-off there. He was 2,100. So I'm going to have to do something different here. But I was going 1 through 4 with Chavez in the 9 hole, just kind of doing a wraparound stack there. And I thought that looked pretty good at the time. Going to have to move it here. Chavez does not, like, he's had a limited sample, but he has a 1.4% walk rate, meaning that you're not getting shorted by his at-bats. The guy's going to go up there and swing, whether or not it's good or not. 297 expected slugging is pretty horrendous, but he's the only bat that's really kind of going in under on him and Franchi Cordero. The outfield is just so stacked with cheapies. Like, there's so many ways to go. Franchi Cordero, 2,500. I think in the 8 hole there, I think it makes some sense if you're going to be stacking them up to try to make the addition of him and Chavez as maybe the 1 or 2 under-owned, underneath 10 or 12% bats that you find on this Boston team, just to get a little bit different, because everybody else, they are going massively owned and they probably deserve to be at their numbers. I mean, Duran is 3K in the 2 hole. You have Devers and Martinez and Hernandez, who just won AL Player of the Week. I mean, they are by all intents and purposes on a hot streak, whatever people want to quantify that as. They're just a really good baseball team.
Yeah, and now just trying to maneuver through that, you've got cost and ownership to kind of balance, right? Yep. So as you mentioned, you're going to pay up for Toronto, but that's fine because, if you're staying away from right there at the top, especially with Garcia, then it's going to be a little bit easier to maneuver. But as far as some of these other stacks, maybe that may fall in line with kind of the parameters that you set, let's go back to my team. Now, you're going to pay more for the Phillies than you are Toronto. So it doesn't really make sense on the surface unless you really feel confident that Harper, Real Muto, Segura, that these guys are going to get to Ross early, chase him, and take advantage of like the 196% humidity that I'm dealing with when I walk outside my back door.
It's a bad sweat when you walk out.
It's brutal. It's brutal. It's like the coffee sweat when you're sitting and doing a show. You wake up, you're all pitted out. I don't want to do that. But then again, I'll defer to you here if maybe I'm missing something with Philly.
I don't think you are. For me, Philadelphia, Joe Ross, I don't know what that pitch count is going to look like. And the longer that he goes, the more apt I am to be steering away from Philadelphia. But if the field isn't going to be there in any kind of a meaningful way, I mean, they're kind of coming in middle of the road, 6.6 top stack percentage, going a little bit under-owned. There's some leverage to be had there. I'm fine to getting to a little bit of them. It's not a team that I get super excited to stack up, with the exception of that Cubs series a couple weeks back. It just doesn't seem like they put up gobs of runs in a spot where I want to be going there. Not that they're Detroit or anything like that, but Segura, Real Muto is one of the best hitting catchers, but you're always paying $5K plus for him. And that's going to be tougher to get to if you're paying up for pitching today. And the reason that you're seeing some of these other stacks go under-owned is just because of the price tags, but you're getting no discount on the Phillies. I think that they definitely make a viable stack here. As you said, great hitting weather, 85 degrees, 55% humidity is what I'm looking at. And I think that that's more than viable to be getting to them, but I'm not going nuts with Phillies today.
A couple of questions on the chat that I saw. And again, it kind of in the backdrop of you being heavy on Toronto, another stack Ryan brought up about Minnesota, and just looking at, where you have the Twins in comparison to Toronto, it's going to be cheaper, clearly, for Minnesota, but you're dealing with more ownership, maybe even a little bit, but still a little more ownership with Minnesota. So the question from Ryan on the chat was, with a couple of question marks, meaning more emphatic, Toronto over Minnesota, but looking at it more from the Minnesota point of view as opposed to Toronto, which you've laid out.
Yeah, so from the Minnesota side, and this is the team that I'm familiar with, and it is not a great baseball team. They suck. They're terrible. But that's not the analysis we're going for. We're going for the bats here. Of course, Josh Donaldson, I think he makes one of the better one-offs. I like playing Josh Donaldson here, but I think a lot of these other dudes are going to be going a little bit overowned. Garver's been coming back and been decent here. He didn't have any form at the beginning of the season. 228 average here, 877 OPS. Definitely improved here since getting back. He had a big game 2 nights ago against the White Sox. He was pretty consistent there, I guess, at the tail end of May before he got back here. Kind of just been limited here. He was on the paternity list right after he got activated. So he's back. He's got the new child narrative, if you want to go that direction. You probably are more familiar with that. Do I need to give Garver a bump for having a child?
No. Look, let me be honest.
He's not sleeping one day in it. Okay.
My performance has not changed. If anything, it's got worse. Like I'm slipping, I'm stuttering, I can't find the right read. I'm all over I'm not following the list that I gave Jordan. Like, if anything, having a child, you mentioned it, sleep deprivation. I don't know how all of a sudden people think, oh, he just had a son, he's going to shoot 30 under par, knock 5 home runs out tonight. That's bullshit. All right, he's going to be drained. And if anything, I would fade a new father more so than anything else.
All right. Well, there we go. No Mitch Garver then. Yeah, I like Mitch Garver. It's fine.
Gordon Powell on the chat disagrees, but look, I'm speaking. Yeah, Mark Curry's right. New child does work. For some reason, golf, it does work. Everything else, I'm fading the new child narrative, Eric.
Well, because in golf, you have to be out there for like 8 hours a day. There's no choice but to have the co-parenting. There's no, I can watch them for a hot second here or there while you're getting ready. Baseball, it's like, oh, you go out there and, you want to spend as much time at home. That's not the analysis we are here for. But Mitch Garver, he's a great catcher. I think that this slate is specifically pretty catcher heavy on the top end. I think on FanDuel, I'd be looking to be playing a lot of those dudes. I think the ownership has finally started to get up there for a lot of these catchers that definitely have power. A lot of them are just, aiming for the fences, Zanino style. But Contreras, Perez, Real Muto, Garver, Haas, Stassi, Vasquez. That is a pretty great core of catcher options above 4K for only a 7-game slate. I would be finding ways to be mixing and matching a lot of those guys into tournaments. They're all getting very high ownership appropriately. So doesn't seem like punting at catcher is a really popular thing to do today outside of, you have that 2K guy for the Zavala guy for the White Sox. I think he'll garner some ownership at 2K, but otherwise there are a lot of catchers that can do some damage on the slate. So definitely be incorporating them more into your stacks than normal.
All right. So before we get to some individual looks, especially starting, of course, at that position, just kind of some long shot, maybe if you want to look at it even more so from a punt standpoint, it would be below even that Philadelphia range. We know as far as the difficulties of hitting in parks, but I can't just let it go. And I know he's still in the chat monitoring and watching, but it's not like it's a zero. There is a non-0% chance that Colorado could break this slate tonight. Why not? Just in the event that EMAC is right, why not?
Okay. Obviously, Ohtani getting leverage against the most popular pitcher on a slate is never a bad thing to do. It's never a bad thing to do. Okay. I get it. But where are we going in this lineup with the Rockies? It's just not a good lineup. Nobody is playing. Like CJ Cron is the highest expected slugging. He's been abysmal this season. Only a 37.6% hard hit percentage. Been very disappointing coming off his days with Minnesota and then Detroit that he played for 1 year here last season. Just started hitting for some power, got into Colorado, and they thought that he would finally be a first baseman. Did you know the Colorado Rockies have the lowest expected runs created from the first base position in the last decade? They have had nobody. Wow. The Daniel Murphy trade worked out horrendously for them. It was probably one of the worst signings in baseball history in hindsight. Maybe it made sense at the time, but definitely a good thing for Daniel Murphy. Get that bag on the way out the door. But Colorado Rockies, just so abysmal, and there's nobody there. McMahon is by far my favorite hitter every day in that lineup. He's actually questionable to even be in the lineup today. I'm waiting on this lineup. We don't know. Maybe that's what they're waiting on here. He's been day to day. He wasn't available on Sunday here. He didn't end up playing there. Maybe it was a maintenance day. That's kind of what I'm looking at for the blurb. But McMahon, if he's not in that lineup, there is nobody. There's no hope for this Rockies team against Ohtani.
All right, we'll start to look at some individual guys again as we see some questions here popping up. Saw you with the Austin Powers reference as well. Is that normal for you to just respond and
I know every word of Austin Powers, the first two Austin Powers movies. I don't
every word
anymore. I know every single word of the very first Austin Powers. Very well, where do I begin?
Wait a second. Hold on.
But
now, I know
every
that
single one. It's like in the commercials. You leprechaun man want to catch the Lucky Charms.
How many movies exist where you could go through the entire script? And I mean that, like, if somebody put a camera in front of you, you could sit there, like Michael Scott's audition where he did that whole Law and Order episode. You would do the entire movie and you wouldn't miss a beat. How many movies do you think exist? Like Terry has 1,000 that he could do.
Oh,
How
Terry,
many do you have?
So Terry and I had a great bonding experience last week. The man he worked at a video store a la Tarantino, and we were definitely going back and forth on, I mean, he's just a film nut. And I mean, I live in Los Angeles. I just love film. I love television, but film has always been just kind of like, for me, the best. And I could say I could confidently do with 99% accuracy the entire original Star Wars trilogy. That I know I could do for near 100% accuracy the very first Austin Powers movie. The Spy Who Shagged Me, I could probably do 95-ish% perfect accuracies. I'm going across with it. I know the entire rap from the moment I heard Frau say I had a clone. I knew that I'd be safe because I wouldn't be alone. An evil doctor shouldn't really talk about his feelings. My hurt and my pain don't make me too appealing. Yeah, there's that.
Not bad.
Every single word from that entire rap from The Spy Who Shagged Me. Good times.
Okay, look, I'm just curious because I've seen people respond. Dumb and Dumber was a movie that Gordon responded to on the chat. I saw Bloodsport.
Okay, I could get close to Dumb and Dumber. I think the tough thing for me is that I would see Dumb and Dumber like a new time, like every 2 years or 3 years. And back when I was a kid, I think that was like one of the first ones my parents are like, this is just stupid. You shouldn't be watching this. It's like, they were like vehemently against watching that being stupid. But Billy Madison and Happy Gilmore. I absolutely know every single words. I know every single word to those.
Every single word, not
every
like,
single word.
Yeah, I remember that scene. That's why I saw, I want to make sure that I have the name right. I saw somebody throw out Bloodsport. And look, I'm as big of an old school Van Damme fan as anybody.
No shot.
But
no shot for me.
that is commitment. I remember Sand, right? Sand. Like that's the only one I could.
This is probably the most obscure one that I probably know every single word to, but Independence Day. I think I know every single word. I saw that movie at least 100. So movies you've seen 100 times. Independence Day is definitely on the list. It's a dumb one.
You would need 100 times though in order to have it, repetition in front of you. All right, fair enough. Look, I was just curious, and we'll take any and every
aside. I'm here for it. I will talk film all day. Die Hard 100%. That would be pretty impressive.
Yeah. Yep, absolutely.
Best Christmas movie of all time, right?
Oh, by all means. Absolutely. I think it's a couple of different genres of movie that it never gets credit for, and Christmas is one of them. And look, I'm a Jew from New York City, and I'm telling you that it's one of the best Christmas movies of all time. So it's branched out. All right. That's how much it's.
Somebody said Tropic Thunder. I wish I could do Tropic Thunder front to back. Tom Cruise's best move. Just
Roadhouse.
Best movie.
Look at this, man.
Roadhouse.
People popping in. I love it. All right, Jock
man. That's an impressive one. If you could do any Sorkin movie front to back, you were my hero. You were my hero.
That's all it takes, by the way, to be Eric's hero.
Yeah, if you can do Aaron Sorkin front to back, if you could do the Social Network or something akin to that, A Few Good Men for sure. I mean, that is just, we live in a world.
Everybody can do the court scene. You want answers, All right. So today's show is, we have to get back to something here. We'll spend the next 18 minutes doing Jack impersonations.
Lineups. Goodfellas, that'd be sick too.
Yeah, I feel like those would be easy. You're at Godfather 2. Like, those are the easy ones. Mention Jock Market, of course, our sponsor tonight. Everything from fantasy sports now morphed and turned into a stock exchange. So take advantage of it. Yes, the NBA season's over, but we have a lot with baseball. PGA's going on. The football season's right around the corner. So use the pregame IPO. It's just like a stock market. You pick up shares of your favorite players, and then, hey, you want to buy or sell. You can do that all in game. You can even hold based on how you feel the game is going. Use our promo code Awesemo, AWESEMO, for a $50 bonus on your first deposit. We'll match it right there. Again, our promo code Awesemo. And look, we don't ask for much in return. Just get the likes up. That's pretty easy. These guys are always giving us these codes, all of these promo codes, $50, $25. What can I do? Can I send Erica a thank you card? No. just hit us up with a like and subscribe. Eric will sacrifice getting fan mail for likes and subscriptions. Is that accurate?
Yes, absolutely. I don't need fans. I don't need love.
No, it's not that you don't need fans. I'm saying you'll sacrifice fan mail.
Oh,
they still exist. They
that.
just won't send you a card.
Yes,
That's
I will
all.
do that. Yep, that's fair.
Okay, so individually here, we'll start with some catchers. Malcolm revamped, though, on the super chat. We're going to have to narrow this question down a little bit here for you, Eric, because the question is which hitters must have on DK. Do you have maybe 2 or 3 guys, one-offs we'll talk about? Take whatever position you want that are must-haves, the guys that you have the most exposure to. Maybe 2 guys you have the most exposure to tonight on DK.
So these are the fun questions. And I know people hate the answer to this, but it's the right answer. And it depends on field size, because the best hitters on the slate are the best values on the slate are guys that I'm underexposed to because they're completely going insanely owned right now. Specifically, looking at Eloy Jimenez, he's 2,500 batting cleanup for the White Sox against a lefty. I don't know what you think, but I think that's just way too cheap for him.
Yeah.
So 2,500 for Eloy Jimenez needs to be like your first batter in over in cash games. I think Enrique Hernandez, 4,100 coming off of just being on fire the last week plus, and also just hitting leadoff for one of the best offenses in baseball with a 6+ implied team total. How do you not like Kiki or Hernandez as well? I would put Devers as probably my favorite Red Sox bat there, but then you run into the issue where he's 5,700. So some of these guys are going to be very expensive. If you want to talk about guys that I think are the best tournament plays on the slate, if you're trying to win a large field tournament, play Vlad Guerrero Jr. He's coming in around 15%. He's the best hitter in baseball, and he's 6K, and just not as many people can get up there. Same thing can be said about Soto and Trey Turner, that I'm just in love with as a 2-man. They're a 2 and 3-man, 6,100 and 6,300, and nobody can get there unless you're playing Michael Pineda or Matt Manning, and that's kind of my route for getting exposure there. So I love them as well. It just depends on your builds. It depends on the field size. If you're playing a field under 1,000 people, you can just kind of play your favorite plays and put together a lineup where you're still being a little bit contrarian, but you can kind of play the Eloy Jimenez combination of guys, those cheapies on the bottom end. So that's probably my roundabout way of answering your question, but it's, if you're playing DK bats, again, you sent the super chat, so I'm going to give it the time it deserves, but yeah, I just absolutely love Max Kepler too, leading off there, but I'm not getting a ton of Max Kepler up against Matt Manning just because he's coming in around 20% on a slate that's only, 14 teams in play. There's a limited of ways to get different here. I think just going cheaper, I think Houston's going way overlooked here. Any of those guys, Kyle Tucker's, if I had to pick one guy that you told me I had to pick for this slate to just go way overweight, 3,400 Kyle Tucker. Why did he just drop to 3,400 over on DK? Him being 13%, I'm happy getting to around 30 of him and just move on with my day.
All right, so let's look individually here as we wind down another 13 minutes before we get out of here and the slate's lock. So as we just had with Malcolm, you have any super chat, get them in. Not necessary, but still, as Eric said, not only the best way to get our attention, but also the most in-depth answers you'll get, no matter what it is, including just making sure that Eric truly knows every single line to...
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to my underground lair. Gathered here before me the world's deadliest assassins, and yet you failed to do me one simple task. Get Austin Powers. That makes me mad. When I get mad, Mr. Bigglesworth gets upset. And when Mr. Bigglesworth gets upset, people die. Boom. Done.
You're a man of costumes, of impersonations on these shows and others on this channel. How have you not created a Dr. Evil bit for a prop or for anything specific on a show yet?
Don't worry, Hot Mama. Things won't get weird. It got weird, didn't it? Yeah. No, I have no idea. I mean, it's a terrible impression of Dr. Evil. It's more of just that horrible. I know the words. It's not horrible. Yeah, it is what it is. It's kind of a parody of myself, kind of like where I do my own thing of the impression. It's not like directly. I will say, out of everybody at Awesemo, though, there is somebody that is very underrated. And if you've never seen this, next time you're on a show, you have to ask him. But Gundacker does a spot-on De Niro. It's scary. It's kind of scary. He has the look, and the look does 99% of the work for him as opposed to the voice. But it is incredible how good Gundacker is at doing De Niro.
Wow.
We were just like killing time on like there was like a 5-game slate that got shortened to a 3-game slate, and we had 75 minutes to talk about it. And at the tail end, I was like, do you have any impressions? Let's just do impressions. And he knocked it out of the park with De Niro.
That's I would never have thought that. And now that's all I want to see.
Now, not in a million years would I have expected it.
When was this? Because I'm going to go back and look at the replay of it.
Oh man, I mean, I haven't done that many shows with Gundacker. I could probably find it for you. I could find this for you. You know what? That's a nice project. That could be a vain project where I make sure I've hit all my own like buttons. And I'll find it for you. I'll find it.
Especially like in the Yankees beanie that he rocks, right?
Yes.
I can see that would be hilarious. All right, so let's speed through this here, and we'll just look now position by, because we're going to get some home run props before we get out of here. I know that people are salivating for home run picks from Eric before we lock tonight. But before that, let's just look position by position. We don't need to go super deep. We can just look at the guys you like the most, maybe 1 or 2 guys per position. We'll start with the catcher spot where normally I'd say, hey, JT, you're going to pay up for a little bit, but you mentioned it. You've got a plethora of options behind the plate.
Yeah, this is one of the better catcher slates I can remember for being a shorter slate. Generally, you're punting off and hoping you get a bomb, or you play somebody like Zunino in the 7 or 9 hole, and you're getting 0 or you're getting 16 out of the dude, and that's kind of the way your day goes. On this slate, I mean, Mitch Garver being in the 5 hole against Manning, he's definitely grading out as the top end play. I'm willing to go a little bit underneath that and just kind of move that ownership to guys like Haas, who's 4,400. He's only 10% here. I think that's probably a little bit low here. I like Zavala at 2K as a punt. He's in the 9 hole for the White Sox, but considering you're looking for ways to get a little bit different, underneath 8K, getting that 2K spot, if he does anything in that spot for you, that's another piece that's going to go a little bit under owned for a very popular team. I think that's an easy way to kind of limit it. But for me, pretty much any slate that I get on, Sal Perez, I mean, he's the best hitting catcher day in, day out. I think you could argue that Real Muto is the best 2-way catcher in baseball, hitting in the 2 hole there too. But Perez going up against any lefty, I know Keuchel limits the damage here, but I think underneath 10% right now, I just refreshed our DK ownership. That would be my favorite for tournaments.
First base, you're going to have an obvious pay up for Guerrero. Abreu's on that slate tonight as well. Where are you navigating? Rhys Hoskins doesn't look terrible now at 4,900, counter some ownership, but where are you looking at first base tonight?
He's fine. I think my favorite, and he's usually my favorite, is Yuli Gurriel. He's sitting underneath 8%, 10%. And I talked about Houston, how much I love them. Gurriel's always kind of the forgotten guy. He does not, and I mean, I repeat, does not strike out. And that is great just to be able to get him involved in your stack. For an X slugging percentage, he's still 372 here on the season. That's not great. 266 expected batting average is great. Only a 10.3% K percentage. I think involving him in your stacks, it always seems like he goes way under owned compared to Altuve, Alvarez, Brantley, Tucker, all the usual boppers at the top end. Make sure you involve Gurriel in there. I'm getting to a lot of Houston, and therefore he's just kind of being a higher piece of my portfolio today. If you don't want to be going his direction, I mean, Vlad Guerrero is for me, just the best play of the slate, just for all intents and purposes. 6K for him. You can make that work here. Do not play Miguel Sano at 4,300 in the 7 hole right now, coming around 12%. I'm just going to hit hard pass on him. So 2 guys I'm for, 1 guy I'm against.
Second base, Houston can keep that rolling. If it's Altuve, you've got Merrifield a little bit higher if you wanted to pay up at this position. Is there a one-off or name that you get to the most at this position tonight, second?
Yeah, so Kiki's the best play at the position, but he's also being owned like it, 22%. Right. So he's way, way up there. Altuve's fine. Again, he always ends up being like the highest owned dude, but he has a 232 ISO now for the season. That's a pretty hefty little number. I like Michael Chavis as like the under-owned piece of a Boston wraparound stack in the 9 hole there. Marcus Semien, another guy that I'm getting to quite a bit in the 3 hole. And if you're going down to like the cheaper end and you're trying to find somebody to kind of get a little bit cheaper exposure to, Will Castro's 3,100 there, going up against Michael Pineda, gets the road bump a little bit. I think you could do worse than him in the 7 hole, but not my most enthusiastic play. I'm definitely paying up more. Harold Castro's 2,300 in the 6 hole, but he's being owned at 14%. An easy tournament pivot is just finding the money to get to Castro and being different that way.
Like the second biggest theme right now on the chat is Gundacker doing De Niro. And I'm totally distracted. Like I that's all I want to do is just see that. All right, let's get third base here. And again, when we start to factor in what we've already paid for different positions, especially working the stack, we'll get to some sort of maneuverability. It's not like you're paying. There's only one guy, if you want to count Bryant, just under at 4,900. There's only one 5K plus guy. It's Devers on the slate here for third base. So how is third base approached by you?
I love Devers. Again, just coming in very, very highly owned. Josh Donaldson, I like as a one-off. If you're going to try to be different and not stack up Minnesota, playing Josh Donaldson. Who's Michael Donaldson? That was a weird thing to say. 18% for him is about appropriate. I'm going a little bit cheaper in some of these spots. Matt Duffy, 2,500 in the 4-hole. Just hate him as a player, but I'm fine with getting to him here, just batting cleanup in front of some decent hitters here for the Cubbies today. Going up against Wade Miley. We know the potential he has from the right side of the plate there. 399 expected slugging, 41% hard hit percentage, 2,500 for him there. He should be higher owned than what he is in this spot.
Shortstop, we mentioned Trey Turner, although that's going to be cost ownership as well. Bo Bichette, maybe as far as your guy there in Toronto at 5,200 on DK. So where is the maneuverability combined with value when it comes to the shortstop position tonight?
There's like no value at the shortstop position. Yeah. It's just not for me. This is a position that if you're playing like 5-2-1 on DK, if you're playing 4-3-1 over on FanDuel, figure out a way to bump up your shortstop position. Give them the little green thumbs ups over on Fantasy Cruncher. Get more of Bichette, Anderson, Trey Turner into your pool. They're just so much better hitters. I mean, that's the difficulty of this slate, is that I think catcher and shortstop are just abnormally good. And you're giving up a lot by playing Kyle Farmer. I'd say Kyle Farmer actually on the bottom end at 3,400 would make the most sense to me up against Kyle Hendricks. Kyle Hendricks, I never really believe in. I never roster Kyle Hendricks, but he limits hard hits for the most part, 34.4% hard hit percentage on the season, but 17.5% K percentage, not going to miss many bats. I think that gives a little bit of opportunity to kind of be going to Farmer, but not excited about it compared to all of the top end studs that we have there in Turner, Anderson, Bichette. Find the money to get there, but Correa is my highest exposed at shortstop. But again, that's just a product of I'm very high on Houston.
All right, so let's end in the outfield, and we'll get the two guys, not three, but the two that you have the most exposure, that you're the most confident in. And I'll tell you this, Bryce, it's not going to be with anybody on base, but Bryce Harper in the first 2 or 3 innings is going to hit a home run tonight. I can pretty much ensure you that. But I can also promise that it's not going to come with anybody on base, and it's probably going to limit a 3-1 or a 4-1 lead already. I don't know if you're getting to Harper at 5,900, the second highest behind Soto. Who are the two guys you love the most tonight in the outfield?
Kyle Tucker. Kyle Tucker's 3,400 on DK. That's like an impossible number for me to get away from. It's absolutely preposterous that his price went down to that point. I don't get it. I mean, he's facing a righty here for the season. Kyle Tucker, 402, 312, 581 expected WOBA, expected batting average, expected slugging. My God, the dude doesn't strike out, under 16% K percentage on the season. Doesn't really ever get shorted with walks either. I mean, he's going up there swinging, 50% hard hit percentage on the season, just behind Yordan Alvarez. The two of them together, Alvarez and Tucker, I just am so obsessed with on this slate. I think they're going way underrepresented compared to the field. Of course, you have Eloy Jimenez. You can play Kiki Hernandez in the outfield, which is why you also see his ownership go up, because you can play him in the outfield as well as playing him at second base. I would try to make sure I played him at second base if I were stacking up Boston. But anyway, I love getting to any of those Houston outfielders, and I will throw in Kepler as well. I know he's popular. He's 20% owned, but now batting leadoff here for the Twins up against Matt Manning, who does not get strikeouts. I'm playing a little bit of Manning, but don't get me wrong. Kepler is still a fantastic play today.
All right, home run. I gave you Harper, so I took him off the board. I'm sure you didn't even have him. If you did, then no problem. You've got a bunch of names. Well, yes. Who do you like to go really? Like, who right now do you have in a model to hit a home run tonight that we can then turn to a book through Odds Shopper and play some bet on?
Well, if you group the outfield by ISO, 344 ISO for this guy, and he's 2,200. He's coming in under 11%. Aristides Aquino for Cincinnati going up against Kyle Hendricks. I'm not sure what that ownership will be, but I'm willing to find out. Roster a little bit of him in this spot. Another guy that I just get to a ton of here, Kyle Tucker. I will just keep saying him. it's too cheap of a price tag for a guy who carries his amount of upside, facing a right-handed pitcher here to start off. It's a dumb price. So give me Kyle Tucker as the top play in the outfield overall, and my main guy to call for a home run. But then Vlad Guerrero Jr. just feels like cheating taking him, but I'll do it because, that's fun.
Why not, man? Why not? I'll just throw in there Nats plus 115. I see him still before the gate closes a minute from now. Jump in, take Washington plus money. Phillies ain't winning this game tonight. I think we nailed it, brother. We got it all in, and we still have time for people to make a decision or two before lock. Look at that.
Yeah, I'm the one making those decisions right now on my lineups. I'm getting everything in here. It's always a little bit of a sweat doing these because I want to be as helpful as possible. And again, absolutely love the conversations we've been having today as well. It's fun to talk a little movies here and kind of mix that into the grouping. But it's been good to be on another show with you, my dude. Haven't seen you forever.
No, I know. Too little, too long, right? So now we're back. And now that I know I can derail you with movie conversations, expect it to happen. All right. It's pretty much a staple. Whatever.
Okay,
they stopped having Terry and I work together because we spent more time talking movies than baseball. So be careful.
It's problematic.
All right. Thank you to everybody out there for popping in, hanging with us. Leave us a like on your way out if you haven't already. Remind people, if you see new names, new faces, make sure you're subscribed as well. Thank Jordan for producing the show tonight. As always, great stuff, my friend. And for Eric, for myself, for everybody here at Awesemo, for the brand new Awesemo Fantasy Football and Odds YouTube channels that you should be subscribed to as well. Have a great night. Enjoy the games. Good luck.